It's the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on Better Sports Network.
Seven o'clock in the PM on Thursday means it is time for the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show right here on the Better Sports Network. I'm your host, Eric Balkman. You can find me on Twitter at Eric Balkman. You probably know me from the FFPC, the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour, the RotoViz High Stakes Lowdown, amongst other things. And I want to welcome in my special guest co-host tonight, joining a long line of FantasyPros legends to co-host the show with me. We've seen Thor Nystrom. We've seen Derek Brown. We've even seen Pat Fitzmaurice. But tonight, we get our first taste of the mind of FantasyPros' own Andrew Erickson. You follow him on Twitter at Andrew Erickson _. Welcome in, buddy. Thanks so much for joining the show.
Eric, thank you so much for that introduction. When I'm just put into a tier with those legends that you listed off, I'm just honored to be on the show.
And I love your Twitter bio, because who wouldn't want to follow you when they read this? Make it easy for you to win at fantasy football is your goal, right? That should be everybody's goal. Let's make fantasy football. It's already fun. We obviously know it's fun, but when it's easy, man, that's even better. How long have you been with FantasyPros? How long have you been in the industry? If you can get the quick and dirty bio on yourself here.
Yeah, so this will be my second year full time at FantasyPros as a fantasy football analyst. I was previously with PFF for two seasons as a full-time guy there. And before then, I was doing some part-time work, Gridiron Experts, fantasy data, a couple spots here and there, just picking up work. But yeah, I mean, talking about fantasy, creating content about this game that I'm absolutely in love with. I could not ask for a better full-time job.
That's fantastic. And I'm glad we're having you on tonight, because you're very knowledgeable about the game. Not only that, but FFPC and FantasyPros are partners this year on the FantasyPros Championship, a contest that is going to pay out a $1 million grand prize. The prize pool from the mid-stakes contest from last year, it's up, I want to say almost 30%, maybe 35% as far as what we're paying out. And $1 million for just a $350 entry fee for a grand prize. That's fantastic. So make sure you're registering for that at myffpc.com. Don't forget, the main event slow drafts are already going on as well. That's another competition that we have. That's a $1 million grand prize. And if you want to play dynasty fantasy football, which I know Andrew Erickson has a lot of knowledge on that as well, you can do so 365 days a year fantasy football dynasty leagues at myffpc.com. 1,400 plus leagues over the last decade and more, and we've never had a league fold. So make sure you're registering for that, myffpc.com, plus all the other leagues and formats we just don't have time to mention over at myffpc.com. Shout out to our producer, Anthony Rivera. Coming up on tonight's show, we're going to get into the news in the first segment. Obviously, a lot of news with the running backs and not getting paid. How does that affect you for fantasy? How should it affect the way that you draft these players? We're going to get into that. We also have not had the chance on this show yet to talk about DeAndre Hopkins, the newest member of the Tennessee Titans. How does that affect Treylon Burks, Chig Okonkwo, Ryan Tannehill, and more? We'll get into that. That's all in the first segment. Coming up in the second segment, we're going to talk about some of the values that you can get in the FantasyPros Championship right now. Who are the players that Andrew Erickson thinks are coming at a discount that you should have on your team as you begin your quest, or maybe continue your quest for a $1 million grand prize? We're going to get into where does Andrew stand on certain players, certain polarizing players drafted pretty high up in the FFPC leagues and obviously the FantasyPros Championship leagues. We're going to get his thoughts on where he stands on those. And then to wrap things all up tonight, Andrew has a ton of 0 RB best ball targets. So if you're in the FFPC best ball tournament, gunning for that $200,000 grand prize, you decide you're going to go 0 RB in it, we're going to examine some of the running backs you should be looking at. And I would imagine that's going to cover you for a lot of contests with the FFPC as well. So it is a massive show tonight. It is huge. We're going to get into a lot of stuff tonight, and we're not going to get into it unless I stop blabbering. So I'm going to do that right now and let Andrew take over. Let's talk about this Saquon Barkley thing. So we found out that Barkley, Pollard, and Josh Jacobs could not come to terms on a long-term deal with their respective teams by the deadline, which was earlier this week, which means they now have to play the season on the franchise tag if they choose to sign it. Saquon Barkley has already threatened to sit out the season. Now, here's where I stand on this. As I look at the ADP data for the Fantasy Pros Championship, Andrew, right now, over the last 3 days, you are looking at Saquon Barkley as the 7th running back off the board, falling to the middle of the 2nd round. We covered a live draft on one of my other shows for the FFPC, and he fell to the 208 on Tuesday night. So he's looking as a mid-2nd round pick. I am totally assured that he is going to play this season. What I am a little bit nervous about is the fact that he probably is going to sit out training camp and the preseason, and he's going to report right before week 1. My concern is him staying healthy. How can you avoid literally everything over the course of late July, all of August, and early September, and still somehow come into fighting shape and be the guy that you were last year to stay healthy? That's my concern. Now, I still like Barkley in the middle of the 2nd round, but it's not without reservations. How would you tell the viewers tonight to handle Saquon Barkley in their fantasy football drafts right now?
I think for me, I stand with you that I do think he's going to end up playing. Like, I'm not concerned about him holding out into the season. I think that the New York Giants are going to find a way. He's going to find a way. He's not going to sit on this money like in a Le'Veon Bell-esque fashion. So for me, I'm definitely want to buy the dip on Saquon Barkley. And when you bring up the like, okay, is he going to be rusty coming off? If he's not going to be, I mean, he's still going to be keeping in shape. He's not going to be sitting on the couch. I mean, this is Saquon Barkley. Like, this is a guy who we've seen rehab multiple times when he was coming back from one of his big injuries. This guy was doing shadow boxing to get back into shape. So he still wants to get his money. He's still got to play out the franchise tag. We'll see how this ends up playing out. But for me, I want to buy the dip on Saquon, and I almost prefer him in bubble wrap. Like, I mean, if he's out in training camp playing preseason games, like, those are just more opportunities where he can get hurt. We see guys get hurt in training camp all the time. So I'm not so sure that we can just pinpoint and say, oh, well, he's at such a higher risk because he's going to miss training camp. It's like, guys get hurt in training camp a lot. Guys get hurt in preseason a lot, especially when there are players that are trying to make rosters that are going to do whatever it takes to make the team. Oh, I'm going to lay a big hit on Saquon Barkley. That'll get the coaches to notice me. Not going to happen. So I think Saquon is fine, even if he misses all of training camp. He's still the RB1. No one on the Giants' backfield is going to assert themselves in any fashion to take away touches from him. So, yeah, I like buying the discount.
Yeah, and obviously anybody who lays out Saquon Barkley in preseason and training camp, the coaches are going to notice him, but not for the right reasons. So this is good. I want to get into this a little bit because, listen, I'm Captain Bubble Wrap, right? I am the guy that tells you I don't want my players that I draft or like I'm in the Northeast Wisconsin area, Andrew. So obviously the Packers are a big part of my life. I don't want any of the Packers getting hurt in meaningless preseason or training camp stuff. At the same time, I do think it's important that they go through some of the training camp. That's just what I've always believed. That's how I think they have to get ready for the season. Again, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but maybe you're making me feel better about this. Is that actually overrated? The fact that Barkley has been in the league for several years now, he knows what training camp is. He knows what it takes to get his body right. I know you can't really replicate it when you're training on your own, but is that overrated? Would you prefer, honestly, running backs to not practice in training camp and preseason, report a week before week 1, and then go in? Because it almost seems like that's better. You're better off doing that in order to mitigate the injuries in the preseason. My concern is, does that help prevent injuries in the regular season?
I mean, if you ask any running back if they want to do training camp or do preseason, they're probably all going to say no. Like, that's one of the things we were talking about, Dalvin Cook, for example. Like, that's why he hasn't signed with the team, because he doesn't want to practice in training camp because he's an older player. And not to say he's even that much older than a Saquon Barkley, but Saquon Barkley knows how to get his body right. And these athletes are so into their routines. Now we have to do everything team related. Okay, that changes how I do my recovery and how I do my setup to get ready for the season. So he can still get ready for the season. And the way that the franchise tag is structured, because he didn't sign it, he's not actually going to get fined. Like, right. This isn't one of those situations where he's going to be fined for missing practices. He's only going to get fined if he misses games, regular season games. So I think that this is a smart move by him, honestly, just to try to use some of the little leverage that he has by sitting out at least training camp, because he's still one of the leaders in the locker room. And hopefully the Giants notice that. Maybe their practices aren't as intense without Saquon Barkley because they don't have that leadership there in the locker room, because he's the best player on their offense. Like, I don't think that that's crazy to really think about. Like, was their engine of their offense last year, and he's a guy that I think that especially Daniel Jones would definitely vouch for.
My buddy Christian Barney Newkirk, who I play against in several dynasty leagues, chiming in the Facebook chat right now, saying he is Team Barkley, and I got to tell you, I am too. I think we're of one mind. Buy the dip on Barkley. I'm a fan of it. The one thing I'll wrap up the Barkley discussion with this, having nothing to do with Saquon Barkley. Regardless of if he reports or not, Andrew, people are going to be looking at drafting the injury away type guys in the backfield. And I don't think that this is a heated discussion between Matt Breida and Eric Gray, the rookie out of Oklahoma that the Giants drafted. But if you are wanting to get Barkley's backup on the team and you're drafting today, July 20th in the Fantasy Pros Championship, would you be willing to draft Matt Breida late or Eric Gray late? If you could only have one, who's it going to be?
I would go with Eric Gray. I mean, we've seen Matt Breida with Brian Dable at multiple spots, and with Buffalo, with the New York Giants, and he seems like he never wants to give him the ball, even when he's had opportunities to do so. So for me, I think that Eric Gray was an intriguing prospect. I think that the only reason he fell to day 3 was because he just tested really badly. Like, he's not this like uber athlete. I mean, he reminds me a lot of Clyde Edwards-Helaire, honestly. And when you think about Edwards-Helaire, okay, as like a 5th round pick, it's like, okay, like I could see some upside there with that. Obviously not a 1st round worthy player, but Eric Gray, great ball security, never fumbled. Like, that in itself is a reason why the Giants could like him, because, hey, he's not going to put the ball on the turf. That's all we need.
When we look at news going on right now in the NFL, there's not a ton of it. There's a lot of speculation. There's a lot of beat writers chiming in on stuff they think about, but there's not a lot of news. Well, we did get a piece of news this week in that the Lions and the Jets have hooked up on a trade. The Lions are sending a 6th round pick to the New York Jets in exchange for a 7th rounder in 2025 and former 2nd round pick wide receiver Denzel Mims. Now, I don't bring this up necessarily of like, oh my goodness, we got to hop all over Denzel Mims. I'm curious to your thoughts on what Mims is going to be on this team for anybody looking to get off to a fast start in the Fantasy Pros Championship. Is Mims worth a late flyer, knowing that we're not going to see Jamison Williams on this squad for a month and a half?
I'm going to say no to Denzel Mims being any type of factor. You know, Denzel Mims really made the reason he was on the roster so long for the Jets is because they liked him as a blocker. Like, that's what they really valued with him, as a run blocker. And that's the kind of guy that Dan Campbell likes. Like, he likes these gritty, big wide receivers that, hey, you're going to block? Okay, then you're going to play. Like, that's where I see Denzel Mims kind of fitting here. They have 2 running backs that they really like a lot. So for me, yes, maybe we see one of these guys emerge behind Amon-Ra St. Brown, but I think it's going to be the Gibbs and Montgomery show, at least until Jamison Williams comes back, with the Sun God obviously being the number 1 target.
And he will be. And I think the thing is that you know, this is interesting now, right? And you can look at, maybe Mims is more of a best ball guy, but quite frankly, when Williams comes back, Mims is a jag, right? Like, there's not that he's going to be traded to Jacksonville, but he is just a guy at that point in this Lions offense. And don't forget about Sam Laporta and Jahmyr Gibbs, who we're going to get into later on in the show as well. I was kind of hoping that Mims would come to Green Bay, but I think the Packers are good with what they have there. Rightly or wrongly, it seems like they're going to go to battle with Watson, Dobbs, and all those young guys there. I want to stick with the Jets conversation here, Andrew, and talk about Breece Hall. Officially, he was listed on the PUP list to begin training camp. Now, if we remember last year, Hall was awesome to start the season until he tore that ACL. In fact, I talked to high-stakes players during the course of the early part of last season, and they're of the mind that Breece Hall is going to be the 101 in 2023 FFPC drafts. Then he tears his ACL. This is a guy that was averaging almost 6 yards a carry. He gets Aaron Rodgers now instead of Zach Wilson, and he has fallen in the Fantasy Pros ADP now, going at the 305 as running back 11 for a guy that a lot of high stakes players were considering with the 101, not first running back, 101 in drafts this year until he got hurt, obviously. How do we handle Breece Hall, knowing the upside, but also knowing that he's on, again, the preseason PUP, which is different than the regular season PUP. But the preseason PUP is where Breece Hall is right now. We're drafting right now. How do we handle Breece Hall when we're on the clock and it's the mid-3rd round, which is where he's going right now?
It's easy. You press the draft button on Breece Hall. So the thing with me with Breece Hall is, okay, Maybe he misses week 1. Maybe he doesn't start the season out super hot out of the gates. It's to be expected coming off a major injury, but Bryce Young is young. Bryce Hall is young. Like that matters. That means he can recover from these types of injuries faster than older players can. And last time I checked, you don't win your fantasy football championship in September or October. Like, you win it during the playoff weeks, just like in the Fantasy Pros Championship, where those playoff weeks are so heavily weighed based on the prize structure and the payout structure. So, yeah, maybe Breece Hall's not firing on all cylinders to start the year. But when the chips are on the line, like, you want to have Breece Hall on your team. So that's why I think you should still be drafting him in the 3rd round. Again, he would be a first-round pick if he didn't get hurt last year, potentially the 101. And when you draft Breece Hall in round 3, you know that in the back of your mind, you can now adjust your draft strategy and target some other running backs that may have better seasons to start the year.
Mm-hmm.
Look at the Saints situation. Okay, you draft Breece Hall, and then you make sure you scoop up Jamal Williams because, he's going to be the starter for the first 4 weeks because Alvin Kamara is suspended, or something along those lines. Samaje Perine. I'm going to grab him because I think Javonte Williams is going to be slow to start the year. So there are a lot of ways that you can build your roster by still grabbing the upside of Breece Hall and mitigating the risk at the same time by the picks that you make later in the draft.
So I think what I want to get into with this is not necessarily because I took Breece Hall in the Scott Fish Bowl. Like I'm fine with that. And again, with the Fantasy Pros Championship or any national contest like the Scott Fish Bowl, you're trying to beat thousands of other teams. Breece Hall is a key to unlocking a few doors in order to do that. So I get it. If somebody is not believing in Breece Hall, if they don't think that this is going to be his year, or if they think that there's going to be some certain, backlash or fallout from him rushing back to try to get to the start of the season, and they don't want to draft Breece Hall, there are a few other running backs that they can look at later on in the draft, led by Michael Carter. Obviously, we saw what Zonovan Knight did last year, Bam Knight, and then the rookie, a player that, I talked to a lot of dynasty players prior to the NFL draft, and they were so high on Israel Abanikanda. Not necessarily high in him now because of the landing spot, but these 3 players are all still being drafted in 20-round redraft leagues like the Fantasy Pros Championship. Andrew, I look at the running backs here. If you don't like Hall, you should like one of these guys. Which guys should you like?
Yeah, this is a backfield behind Breece Hall that I haven't really had a firm stance on because, Michael Carter is definitely the veteran player. Like, he would probably get the nod, but how good is Michael Carter actually? Like, he's always been a committee back. So it's kind of like it's his job until they get sick of him underperforming and they're going to get to somebody else. So, again, I'm always a sucker for some of these explosive rookie running backs. So Abanikanda, like, super young, super raw, but all the guy needs is a lane and he's going to hit it and go. Like, and when I think about the players that make these big plays in championship weeks, it's not usually these players that are getting by because they're grinding. It's the Rashad Pennies that you remember that, Rashad Penny had this 4-game stretch where we're just ripping off 80-yard touchdowns left and right. That's not Michael Carter. Like, there's no way that's Michael Carter. So for me, it's Abanikanda. Even if he's buried on the depth chart to start the year, which is, I would not be surprised at that at all. But from like a pure talent standpoint, I mean, the guy's got gas. So that's who I would probably lean on. He's probably also the cheapest, probably him and Knight. He's probably cheaper than Michael Carter as well.
I'm looking at that right now. Now that you bring that up, let's check that out in the latest ADP I have for the Fantasy Pros Championship. As far as backup running backs go, Abanikanda and actually Michael Carter and Abanikanda are basically back-to-back right now in the 16th and 17th round. Abanikanda is running back 66. Michael Carter is running back 67. I'm not seeing Bam Knight on there. But to your point, Bam Knight is not going to be that Arlen Harris, Jamal Charles, let's go crazy at the end of the season running back type player. So I think that there's a lot of reason to be liking Abanikanda, taking him late now and stashing him on your roster literally as long as you can just to see what happens at the end of the season. To continue the running back conversation, Ramondre Stevenson, for those who had him in Dynasty or already had him on their teams prior to the NFL draft, knew that they'd be dodging some bullets or trying to dodge bullets in the NFL draft. Patriots didn't really sign anybody in free agency. They lost Damian Harris in free agency, who we're going to get to later on in the program. And then they didn't do much in the draft. Ramondre Stevenson owners were rejoicing. Now we hear this report that I think it was yesterday, Andrew, that the Patriots worked out several running backs, including Darrell Henderson and Leonard Fournette. Now, I don't necessarily think that either one of these guys are players I want to be in business with this year. But the thing that it brings up in my mind is, okay, now that I know that the Patriots are actively looking for somebody to add to their roster that already has, Kevin Harris, Pierre Strong, Stevenson, what have you, is Stevenson still a smart choice as the 9th running back off the board at the 303, ahead of guys like Breece Hall, we just talked about, Josh Jacobs, Jahmyr Gibbs, and Najee Harris? Your thoughts on Ramondre Stevenson after you saw that the Patriots worked out these veteran running backs?
I mean, for me, it's I hope that they sign somebody and then I can just get Ramondre Stevenson at a cheaper price. Like that's really what I'm hoping, kind of, especially if it's Darrell Henderson. Like if anybody thinks that Darrell Henderson is going to do anything, I mean, clearly they weren't paying attention to what he did with the Rams, or we should say what he didn't do with the Rams, with all the chances that he got year over year. They continued to replace him every single season. And then I think he flamed out with the Jaguars last year. So I mean, I love Ramondre. I think that he's an uber talented running back, and I don't really care who they add. And people will overreact to it. Like, oh, it's going to be a committee. Ramondre Stevenson is a giant, explosive pass catching running back. Like, he checks off all the boxes of a fantasy running back that you would fall in love with. And we saw it last year. He's still going to be the engine to this team. And even if they bring in somebody, I mean, they brought in James Robinson, and then they cut him. And people were worried about James Robinson. So I'm not worried about any of these players. Fournette is way past his prime, and Darrell Henderson has been a Jag, is a Jag, will continue to be a Jag.
In more ways than one, as we pointed out. I think the thing with Stevenson is, like, if he just, I've seen this movie before. I know how it ends. There is going to be a dip when and if the Patriots sign a running back. You're right. If they sign Fournette, if they sign Henderson or somebody, Stevenson will fall in drafts. He's not going to be going in the early 3rd. Does he fall to the 4th round? I don't know about that. But the fact that you can get him in the mid to late 3rd, and there's going to be a period where you're going to be able to cash in on that in the Fantasy Pros Championship. That's why I always encourage people to draft early to take. I mean, Biplab Mandel, a guy who's won I don't know how much money playing in high-stakes fantasy football in the FFPC, was on Twitter today saying, like, this is why you draft early, because there's these pockets where the ADP shifts and you can really take advantage of it. And this is one of those things with Stevenson too. There is going to be a dip there, but I think as we get closer to when we have the FFPC live events at Planet Hollywood, you're going to see him go back up again, and then there will not be a dip that you can get right now. So I'm with you on that. Buy Ramondre Stevenson. Barney Newkirk is Team Stevenson as well in the Facebook chat tonight. We've been talking about fake Jags all night. Let's talk about a real Jag in Tank Bigsby, who apparently has wowed the Jacksonville coaching staff with his pass catching ability. I'm trying to find, I have the update here on fantasypros.com where I get this news. Garrett Ball had this update. So the Jaguars apparently think that they found their backup to Travis Etienne. Now, Etienne is going to get all he can handle in this backfield, but if Bigsby shows that he is capable of taking a couple of series away, that'll probably eat into Etienne's workload, which I don't think is a bad thing, because that's going to keep him healthy for the course of the season. So I do like that. I like Bigsby as well. This is a player that people before and after the NFL draft were in on Bigsby as far as high-stakes drafters go. I am as well. It's not affecting the way I'm drafting Etienne, Andrew, but should it? Should we be worried about Bigsby from an Etienne standpoint, who, by the way, right now in Fantasy Pros drafts is running back 15 at the 405?
Yeah, so it's interesting you asked me about Tank Bigsby, because he's a very hot topic over at Fantasy Pros, because I am a notable Tank Bigsby hater, and I'm not a huge fan of him. I did not like his college profile, and I don't think that he's a threat at all, really, to Travis Etienne. I think that Tank Bigsby has to show that he has the job over JaMychal Hasty, over Dearness Johnson. I mean, those guys have done stuff at the NFL level. Like, why are we just putting this guy on this pedestal? He was a 3rd-round pick. This guy wasn't drafted in the top 50. It's not like a Zach Charbonnet type draft capital where they actually invested something significant. They drafted a tight end when they didn't need to in the 2nd round before they drafted Tank Bigsby. And just to be honest, I went in being like, oh God, this guy's name is Tank Bigsby from Auburn. I'm expected to be blown away. His name is Tank. And I wasn't. I was underwhelmed. And that's just my opinion. Now, it differs from the public sentiment, and clearly the Jaguars liked him enough to draft him in the 3rd round, but this is all lip service. Of course they're going to say that they like his pass catching or whatever. This is the same copy and paste stuff that you get from every team that drafts a running back, especially because I think this came specifically from the running back coach. Like, what is he going to say? Like, oh, yeah, like the guy we drafted in the 3rd round, yeah, he actually sucks, but I don't want to say that here. I want to say that he's good. So I am, whatever this affects Travis Etienne, if people are like, oh, well, Tank Bigsby's going to eat, like, I don't care. Travis Etienne put up a Jonathan Taylor-esque season last year as a rusher. Like, not enough is talked about that. It was his first year in the NFL. He missed his entire rookie year. He comes out, is an uber efficient rusher, and everyone's complaining, well, he didn't catch enough passes. And I look at the roster, I'm like, yeah, well, it's hard to catch passes when Evan Ingram, Christian Kirk, Zay Jones, Marvin Jones all stay healthy. You think that Austin Eckler is going to catch as many passes as he did because Mike Williams missed time, Keenan Allen missed time, Justin Herbert couldn't throw the ball down the field? What about Ramondre? Who were the Patriots receivers last year? We don't know because they were all hurt or they all sucked, which is why Stevenson got such a high target share. So I'm not putting the blame on Etienne as, oh, well, he can't catch passes. Like, he's not good enough. His efficiency is bad in the receiving game. The offensive coordinator came out and said, yeah, we're just not designing enough stuff for Etienne right now because we have receivers and tight ends we want to throw the ball to. Because, yeah, of course, that's what you want to do. That's how you move the ball down the field. So, like, you don't build your game plan right. All right, we got to get the ball to the running back in the passing game. No, those are less valuable touches, as we talked about with running backs, just less valuable. So, for me, I'm buying the Etienne. I think Etienne is going to be better than he was last year. And we all love this Jaguars offense. He's going to be the guy that gets the goal line touches. He could score 15 touchdowns this year, rush for 1,500 yards, and people will still complain, oh, well, he only caught 40 passes. Well, whatever. I'll take him, and he'll be an RB1.
So this is let's expand this ETN conversation. Almost 1,500 total yards last year, 35 catches. He got in the end zone 5 times, which I think we always underrate the not you, but like a lot of people underrate how unpredictable and unsticky touchdowns are, right? If ETN rushes for 10 touchdowns last year, all of a sudden he's not a mid-4th round pick. He's a mid-2nd round pick, right? So I want to get your thoughts on ETN. It sounds like you think he is being underdrafted in the mid-4th round. And if you don't like Bigsby, that's fine. But would you be looking at drafting a guy like Hasty or Dearness Johnson later on, whether you're playing in a closed 12-team league where, getting the backup maybe is a little bit more important, or maybe if you don't get ETN, is there value in drafting a backup Jaguars running back not named Tank Bigsby later on in your Fantasy Pros Championship draft?
I mean, no, because I feel like there are other backup running backs I could draft that I feel better about their roles. Like, I really don't know who the backup's going to be. Like, I feel like it's pretty ambiguous. And what if one of these guys gets cut? Like, Dearness Johnson, like, 2 years ago, we talked about Dearness Johnson as like a guy we really liked. He was being drafted all the time. It's like, yo, if Nick Chubb goes down, Kareem Hunt goes down, like, this guy's going to have a massive role. And then last year, he was just like totally jettisoned. They didn't use him. They didn't use Kareem Hunt really at all either. So just kind of like weird vibes we have from Dearness Johnson. But dude, we all saw what he did in primetime games. Like, this guy delivered massive games in the NFL. So I could see him garnering interest at some potential places, even if it's away from Jacksonville potentially. Go look at Arizona. Their offensive coordinator was with the Browns all last year. What if James Conner goes down? Are they going to turn it over to Keontae Ingram? No, maybe they give the Jaguars a call and be like, hey, we'll send you a 7th round pick for Dearness Johnson. Sign me up. Let's go. Yeah. So I'm looking at guys who could put spiked weeks. It would probably be Dearness Johnson. But at the same time, I feel like on the board, there are going to be more defined role players that I can draft instead of trying to guess out of a hat 3 different guys who's going to be the backup to Jacksonville, which may not even matter if ETN stays healthy.
So, Andrew, let's get back to the ETN aspect of this because I know you like him this year. I want to do a would you rather with you. I'm going to give you ETN, and then I'm going to give you a running back that's actually going ahead of him on ADP in the Fantasy Pros Championship right now. You tell me who you'd rather have. So we'll start it off with Travis Etienne or Joe Mixon.
ETN.
Travis Etienne or Najee Harris.
ETN.
Travis Etienne or Jahmyr Gibbs.
ETN.
Travis Etienne or Breece Hall.
So this is the one where I'll go Breece Hall. It's very close though. I have them back to back my ranks. Okay, so it's close.
Two more. I'll end it with this: Travis Etienne or Josh Jacobs.
ETN.
Travis Etienne or Ramondre Stevenson?
Still going to stick with Ramondre.
There is for a guy like you who is, and I know can you give the shout out right now, because you're actually going to be drafting in a Fantasy Pros Championship draft. When is that, in case people want to compete against you, or maybe the draft is already full? I don't even know.
Nope. Yeah. So it's still scheduled. So I'm just checking it right now. So it's going to be August 28th, Monday, 4 p.m. I believe it's a Monday, August 28th at 4 p.m. I know one of my buddies has already joined it, and he's a big Travis Etienne guy too. So Etienne won't last that long in this particular room. So just so you know.
For anybody who wants to try to beat Andrew Erickson and get this $1 million grand prize in the Fantasy Pros Championship, myffpc.com, click on Fantasy Pros Championship. The league number is 54271, 54271, 4 p.m. Eastern on August 28th. You can take down Andrew Erickson or maybe get destroyed by him. Either way, it's a fantastic story. We are up against it, but I do want to get into this, and we probably should have let off with this. This is me being a horrible show sheet preparer. DeAndre Hopkins is now a Tennessee Titan, Andrew. There's a lot of different things to unpack with this. Let's start with Hopkins and himself. I never really docked him in my, not that I do rankings, but when I was doing drafts, I never really pushed him down when he didn't have a team. I always thought he was going to have a team, and I always thought he was going to be a focal point of that offense. In the 3 days since he has signed with the Tennessee Titans, he is 4'11" on average, gone as high as the 402. On average, he is the wide receiver 21 right now. He's behind Judy and Deebo Samuel. He's right ahead of Christian Watson and Drake London. Does that seem about the right spot, the end of the 4th round, that you want to be in business with Hopkins? Or should he actually be going higher given the target share that he should command in Nashville?
No, I think that's about right. That's kind of where I have him placed in my rankings, and kind of when I've done, I know I grabbed him in the Scott Fish Bowl, I think actually before he signed with the Titans, because I figured, okay, let's try to get some closing line value here with him. And yeah, I feel comfortable with him as like a back end wide receiver too. Look, he's better obviously in the PPR because he's going to get volume in this offense, but how much does he have left? I mean, he was good last year with Arizona Cardinals, but he also played on an offense that was throwing the ball like the second highest rate behind only Tampa Bay. Like, that's not the Tennessee Titans MO whatsoever. They want to give the ball to Derrick Henry as many times as I can. So it's not going to be the case. So I don't think he has like wide receiver 1 upside. So you have to kind of factor that into your analysis when you draft him. But he definitely has like a safer floor than a guy like a Christian Watson, where Watson's range of outcomes is he could be a top 10 receiver. Like, I could totally see that, but he could also finish outside the top 48. Like, Hopkins is not going to be worse than a wide receiver 3. Like, that's not going to happen as long as he's healthy. So that's kind of how I view Hopkins. I think that he's being priced, accurately.
A guy who is Hopkins' new teammate was a player that was sought after heavily by FFPC dynasty players. And honestly, if you were drafting early in January, February, when we had these drafts going off at the FFPC, Treylon Burks people were very excited about him, knowing that this is going to be a second year after he came on slow at the start of last year, but ended up really strong. And this is a player that everybody was assuming was going to take a big leap forward. That is not going to be easy now, given that he does have to contend with DeAndre Hopkins. Treylon Burks is the wide receiver 38. He is going on average at the end of the 7th round behind Jackson Smith and Jigba, Jahan Dotson, and then right ahead of George Pickens and Jordan Addison. How far should Treylon Burks be falling after this Hopkins signing, Andrew Erickson?
I think he should be in the wide receiver 40 range. So 40, 41, 42. So
he hasn't fallen far enough yet, in your opinion, right?
No, I want to get a discount on him, because you should get a discount. Like, he's not the number 1 receiver on his team. And that was a big appeal with him, because it's pretty easy to see the scenario where he doesn't produce. He just doesn't get enough targets. Like, it's pretty easy to see. Now, I think that he can make up for it when I draft him as a 4 wide receiver. I'm hoping that his efficiency is what really boons for him playing alongside a guy like Hopkins. Like, the defense is not going to be paying attention to Treylon Burks, and there is no volume play anymore. It doesn't exist in just the way that the offense is constructed. So he has to get there with efficiency, but that should happen. Like, if they move him more inside, with Hopkins potentially playing more on the outside role, like that's what Burks did at Arkansas. He was a bigger slot receiver, and they didn't use him in that role last year. He was really playing the X because they didn't really have a bunch of guys that they could really use to be, they had to put Burks outside because they didn't have anybody else to play it. But now they have Hopkins. So I do like Burks as a wide receiver 4, but not someone anymore that I'm like, oh, I need to get. It's more, hey, he's falling. I'll scoop him up.
You know, the other big cog in this Titans passing offense last year is a player that's really risen up draft boards this year, and that's Chiga Okonkwo, the tight end. He is still going as tight end 12, right behind Dalton Schultz, right ahead of Greg Dulcich. He's going, again, tight end premium, so he's going at the 9-10 turn right here as tight end 12. How much or how little does Hopkins affect Chiga Okonkwo's output for the Titans offense this year? And is that a good spot to be drafting him in the early 10th round, Andrew?
No, that is not a horrible spot to be drafting Chiga Okonkwo, in my opinion. Look, we weren't even sure how many targets he was going to get with Treylon Burks. And really, he just kind of was up the draft boards because he was really efficient as a rookie, but it's also on a small sample size. Like, he didn't get that many targets or get that many catches, but he was efficient on them, which is good. But we want guys that get volume. You know, getting that extra point for a reception or half a point or scoring more points per reception with a tight end premium, you need volume. He doesn't get more points for the yardage that he gets. Like, that's not necessarily helping his case here. So with Chig, I am trying to move away from him. Like, what's the difference between him and Jelani Woods at this point? Jelani Woods is really efficient as a rookie too, except Jelani Woods goes like eons after Chiga Okonkwo. You know, but their offense is not going to throw the ball a lot too. Their offense has one guy, Michael Pittman versus DeAndre Hopkins. Mm-hmm. So I think that Chig right now, like, people are not adjusting enough. It's like, okay, I liked him before. I don't like him as much, but no other tight end is kind of like taking him over him for that reason. We're just trying to find guys we like. So for me, there are other players, Mike Gesicki, I like way more than Chig. Again, like Jelani Woods, like, I don't necessarily like Woods more than Chig, but when you consider the prices, just take Woods.
We don't have the time to get into it tonight, but as far as third tier tight ends this year, which has always been kind of like, you're basically just firing darts at a dartboard and see what happens in previous years. I don't think you're doing that this year. And to your point, Jelani Woods is basically going 6.5 rounds after Chiga Okonkwo. He's being drafted as tight end 27 as opposed to tight end 12. You want to wait to stay away from Okonkwo? Maybe you're getting similar output with Jelani Woods as well. That's something to be thinking about. We have a ton more to think about here on the show, including the Fantasy Alarms All-Pro subscription. Has everything you have that you need for this fantasy football season. It includes the Fantasy Alarm Fantasy Football Draft Guide. It's a cheat sheet and a one-stop shop for dominating your drafts. It's digital, constantly updated with new information. You can get the draft guide for $26.99 or free with a monthly or annual subscription to Fantasy Alarm. You can start your 7-day trial to Fantasy Alarm All-Pro and get immediate free access to the draft guide. Go to fantasyalarm.com. We're going to step out and take a quick break. We're just heating up. We're just warming up. We're just doing this. Andrew Erickson from Fantasy Pros and I, we're basically stretching out right now. We're getting those hamstrings loose. We're getting the glutes loose. We're getting the arms loose, everything. We're going to hit it hard this next segment. Fantasy Pros Championship draft values. Many people are gunning for a $1 million grand prize, probably yourself included if you're watching this program. Who are the guys that you need to be targeting in the mid rounds, in the late rounds, to get an advantage over your competition? We're going to talk about a couple of Bills. We're going to talk about a couple of Chargers and some other players right here on the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show. Andrew Erickson, Eric Balkman, coming back right after this on the Better Sports Network.
The High Stakes Fantasy Football Show with Eric Balkman.
I say this real quick on Davante Adams is that if you go over to the FFPC, that's what we've been talking about. They're good friends of ours, and they have expert drafts where, like, that's where the big dogs eat, right, Joey? Like, that's where if you want to do like a $300, $500, $2,000 league with not that many people in it, where the winner gets $1 million, like where if you lose, you lose $2,000 though. But I mean, that's where if you want to play high stakes, that's where you should go. And when I look at the ADP over there compared to other places, Davante Adams is going farther down than you would expect. So when, some of these other sports books have him at 1,300 yards, which is right where they have Justin Jefferson, right where they have Jamar Chase, for him to be going where he's going, I mean, Jefferson goes 1, Chase goes 2, Tyreek Hill is also at 1,300 yards. He goes 4. Over there, he's going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, wide receiver 10 after Amon-Ra St. Brown, after Garrett Wilson. Those guys are some of the sharpest of the sharp. I know the ADPs are very close between him and Garrett Wilson, but you got to take that into effect. And if you like Davante Adams like I do, what you should do, go over to FFPC, myffpc.com, sign up, use promo code ALARM. They'll match an instant $25 when you deposit $35 or more. and take advantage of that, right? Like now that I've seen his ADP, I like him. I'm going to go over there and take him over there. Joey, you don't, so maybe you don't. But I mean, wide receiver.
I'll join the
10,
league with you though.
Let's do it. Yeah, let's split.
Yeah.
Well, maybe not $1,000. $1,000 each. You want to go? Maybe we'll do.
I might.
mean,
I might get in a little trouble for that.
yeah. Well, dude, the thing is, they have leagues as cheap as $5. They have best ball
Okay,
leagues,
I can
all
do
that.
that.
Yeah, maybe we'll do like a $50 one, $25.
Okay, I'll split a $50 team with you.
Okay, yeah, let's do that. Let's lock that in over at FFPC.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Okay, you get Devontae Adams and I get Samaje P. Ryan, and then we'll just be fine. We both get a guy, and then we'll draft.
I think that's fair. An equal amount of draft capital used on both, right? So
absolutely.
Yeah, but check that out. I noticed that one, that FFPC, and that actually goes to the two you guys' point. Like the high stakes guys don't like him. So that's a little scary too.
Mm-hmm.
But
I think
where
the
you
high
were
stakes
saying
guys are really sharp.
Yeah, where you were saying he was going as a wide receiver 10, like while I'm passing on him, I think that's fair. It's people taking him as like the 4th and 5th. Like I'm out on that.
Yeah,
which I've seen.
You can't do. I've seen it too. And I sometimes with guys like that, I like that when that happens, where I just like, oh, nice, somebody reached for that guy, and now I don't have to think about it because he is a little scary, right? It's like, so I actually sometimes like when guys get reached on, and I'm just like, okay, I'm good. Thank you for saving me for myself.
Yeah, it's like a life raft that you never asked for.
It's High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on Better Sports Network.
19 minutes until the top of the hour here on the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show, brought to you by the FFPC. We're on the Better Sports Network. He is Andrew Erickson. Follow him on Twitter at Andrew Erickson _ from FantasyPros. I'm Eric Balkman, HSFF Hour, RotoViz High Stakes Lowdown, and the FFPC. By the way, the FFPC, the home of season-long fantasy football. 2 separate $1 million grand prizes this year in the FFPC main event, as well as the Fantasy Pros Championship. We're going to be crowning 2 millionaires this year with the FFPC. You can also play in best ball leagues, dynasty leagues, our Terminator tournament, FFPC Weekly Challenge, the Super Bracket, Varsity, High Society, everything we have going on at myffpc.com. And by the way, you can use promo code ALARM at myffpc.com for an exclusive offer to get $25 off your first entry of $35 or more. That means the $35 league is just costing you $10. Go to myffpc.com, myffpc.com. Use promo code ALARM. Andrew Erickson has some draft values if you are going to be drafting in the Fantasy Pros Championship. Now, some of these players that we're going to be talking about, they're a little polarizing here, but I feel like Andrew's going to be able to defend himself well. The cons to drafting 49ers this year, Andrew. We're unsure on what's going to happen with the quarterback position. And we also know there's a lot of talented players up there that have their ADPs steamed up. Deebo Samuel, George Kittle, Christian McCaffrey. And then another one of those guys, a guy that you like, is Brandon Ayuk. Can you tell us what you like about Brandon Ayuk this year?
Well, he's the cheapest one. Like, he's the cheapest access to the 49ers offense that we all want pieces of. So that's why I look at him as a great value. Last year, he was wide receiver 15, impressive in yards per route run and in route participation. So it was career high in yards per route run for him for 1.82, 96% route participation. That means he's running a route on almost every single dropback in the 49ers offense. So he's run a route on 95% of the team's dropbacks since week 9 of the 2021 season. So while McCaffrey and Deebo and Kittle are all fighting for targets over the middle of the field, you know who's like always running routes downfield on the outside week in and week out because he hasn't missed any games over the last 2 seasons is Brandon Ayuk. So yes, we're expecting some of these guys to miss time, but you know who we shouldn't expect to miss time is Brandon Ayuk because he's the only one that's been able to stay healthy out of all these 49ers pass catchers. So, yes, you're drafting him in round 5 because he's technically the wide receiver 2 on his team that's loaded with weapons. But how long is he actually going to be buried on the depth chart? Like, I don't think it's going to be that long. So, for me, especially what we saw for him last year, without Deebo Samuel, he was a wide receiver 1 in points per game. So he already has a wide receiver 1 ceiling that we've already seen. We know he's good. He's a former first-round pick, and he's been productive every time he's gotten opportunities. So I am just seeing him continue to rise, continue to grow. He goes up my rank. I just think he's one of the best picks in the middle rounds that you can make.
You know, you could probably win some bar bets, even with hardcore fantasy football players, when you ask them, hey, which Niners pass catcher last year had a 1,000-yard season? And I think the popular choices would be, oh, Deebo Samuel, oh, it's George Kittle, oh, Christian McCaffrey. No. It was actually Brandon Ayuk, and he did it on fewer than 80 catches. 78 catches last year, 1,015 yards, and he got in the end zone 8 times. Ayuk is wide receiver 28 right now, going on average at the 603 in the Fantasy Pros Championship, right behind Godwin and Deontay Johnson. He's going right ahead of Christian Kirk, and Mike Will made it. That's Mike Williams from the Los Angeles Chargers. Good value there on Brandon Ayuk for sure. Dave Sadowski is watching us on YouTube right now. He says he is playing in the Fantasy Pros Championship this year, gunning for that $1 million grand prize. He wants to know which sites are the best for in-season research, waivers, and rankings. I can tell you this right now. I can't play in the Fantasy Pros Championship because I am an employee of the FFPC. We put the contest on. It wouldn't work. You can't do it. Legally, I can't do it. But I do play in a lot of other leagues, a lot of private leagues, and a lot of leagues that are fashioned after the FFPC scoring. And the website that I use most predominantly, and I have for I don't know how many years now, is Fantasy Pros. I mean, tailored stuff for whatever league you're in, whatever, you're playing in the FFPC, you want insight into, waivers and, blind bidding or what have you during the course of the season. Fantasy Pros has you covered there. We've had so many Fantasy Pros guests on, so I would definitely recommend that. And I will say, too, we have a lot of smart people over at Fantasy Alarm that know what they're doing, that play in the FFPC, that have been successful in the Fantasy Pros Championship, the FFPC as well. So check out Fantasy Alarm as well. Those are the two sites I would recommend. And Andrew Erickson, I think, you're probably going to hang your hat on Fantasy Pros being a pretty good website.
Yeah, that's all right. Yeah, check it out.
Yes, give it a shot, fantasypros.com. Okay, should we be giving a shot to another Buffalo pass catcher not named Stephon Diggs? Well, let's talk about Gabe Davis here. This is a guy that I think a lot of people were excited about coming into the 2022 season, Andrew, based on what he did in that legendary playoff game in the divisional round against the Chiefs. 8 catches, 200 yards, 4 touchdowns. It was insane. And even in that first game, if I remember correctly, of the season, the 2023 season on Thursday, he actually had a pretty good game that game as well. Kind of let us down throughout the season, and he is paying the price for that in his ADP. Wide receiver 41. He is going off the board at the 806 behind George Pickens and Jordan Addison. He's going right before Elijah Moore and Quentin Johnston. So why is Gabe Davis a player that we should be paying attention to? Again, when we're trying to win a 7-figure grand prize in the Fantasy Pros Championship, how can Gabe Davis help us get us there?
Well, basically all the reasons we liked Gabe Davis last year are still there, except now he's half the price that we had to draft him at last year because we steamed him up so much that we basically made it impossible for Gabe Davis to actually pay off his ADP. And that's what ultimately hurt us because at the end of the day, he still ended up finishing the season as a wide receiver 3. He was a boomer bust wide receiver 3, but those boom games were massive. He finished as a fantasy wide receiver 1, so inside the top 12 at a higher rate last year than Devonta Smith and the aforementioned Brandon Ayuk. He had more top 12 finishes than Mike Evans, Tyler Lockett, DK Metcalf, Chris Olave, and another 49er, Deebo Samuel. He ranked top 10 in total routes run per game and was ahead of Stephon Diggs in total routes run. 22nd in red zone targets, 13th in deep targets. And who did the Bills add this offseason that we're afraid of? This guy's going to eat into Gabe Davis' playing time. Dalton Kincaid, a tight end.
That's what I was going to ask you. What's the impact on him? It sounds like it's minimal for you.
Yeah, for Gabe Davis, who's the perimeter X wide receiver on this team. Like, they don't have anybody else on this roster that's going to vie for snaps with Gabe Davis because no one on the team proved that they could take Gabe Davis' job last year. Right. So why do we expect him to lose his job this year? So for me, he also dealt with an injury. Josh Allen got banged up at the end of last year as well. So I think that Gabe Davis is just the quintessential post-hype sleeper where we were all really high on him. He didn't deliver. The price is now super suppressed, but all the reasons that we still liked him are still there. So I'm willing to go back to Gabe Davis, especially with he's just so cheap.
I think for anybody who, sometimes, and this is something I've battled with, when I hear people talk up a player that I do not like or whatever, I oftentimes tune out. And maybe some of you did tune out there like, Andrew Erickson's crazy. I'm not drafting Gabe Davis. I'm just going to tell you this right now. You don't have to like Gabe Davis to draft him this year. as Andrew pointed out, wide receiver 41. This guy is going so late. He's never gone this late before, except for maybe outside of his rookie year. And he's in one of the most prolific offenses in the NFL. You should like Gabe Davis, but if you don't, that's still not reason enough not to draft him, given how low he is going in drafts right now. Let's talk about his teammate in Buffalo, his new teammate in Buffalo, who was in New England last year. Now he's in Buffalo. It's Damian Harris. This is another player. I'd have to look at my Scott Fishbowl team again. I either was going to pick him and I got sniped, or he's on my team. But this is a player I was looking at. Running back 41, Andrew, right now. At the 10:04, behind Devon Achane, Jamal Williams, right ahead of Jerick McKinnon and Tank Bigsby. Harris in Buffalo. No Devin Singletary there anymore, by the way. And I guess we should bring up the James Cook aspect as well. Now, James Cook is going as running back 31 in the early, basically at that 7-8 turn, right? So he's going about 2 rounds ahead of Damian Harris. Why should we be paying attention to Damian Harris this year, my friend?
Because Damian Harris has a chance to lead the NFL in touchdowns, rushing touchdowns. Remember, 2021, Damian Harris tied for second in the NFL with 15 rushing touchdowns. 18 of his 20 career touchdowns have come from inside the 20-yard line. This guy is a red zone machine. And what have the Bills done this offseason? They've added offensive linemen, especially at the interior. They've talked about, okay, maybe we don't want to use Josh Allen as a battering ram at the goal line. We want to protect him. We want to protect our franchise quarterback. We saw him get banged up last year, and what do you know? That didn't work out in their favor. They needed a guy that could rush between the tackles at the goal line. Devin Singletary couldn't do that. Damian Harris has done that at multiple stints, and the Bills have seen it firsthand. There have been so many games, Patriots-Bills, where Damian Harris has run wild over Buffalo's defense. So they've seen it. They've seen it work. And I think they're going to deploy Damian Harris in this goal line rushing role, and that's going to lead to a lot of touchdowns. If I'm going to push my chips in on a guy being this year's Jamal Williams, it's Damian Harris.
And I think that's important to remember, too, because this isn't just lip service that we think, oh, Josh Allen, he's going to regress to the mean he's not going to get that many rushing touchdowns. This is something that both Allen and McDermott have talked about in not having Allen rush the football as much as he did the last couple of years in order to prolong not only his NFL career, but prolong how many snaps he's going to be out there over the course of the season. And then the Bills went out and got Damian Harris, a guy who's had more than a few really good games running the ball with New England. Now he goes to Buffalo. No Devin Singletary there as well. Are you staying, given how everything you've talked about with Damian Harris, are you staying away from James Cook in the 8th then because you think Harris is the better value in the 10th?
Yeah, for the most part. I mean, James Cook's still pretty going. He's going pretty late too. Like I'm not opposed to taking James Cook where he goes. Like I honestly don't think drafting both Bills running backs is a bad strategy. To be totally honest, like I consider drafting both of them sometimes depending on where they're going in drafts. But usually I opt for Damian Harris just because he goes a little bit later. I think that in full PPR, I think that James Cook is definitely more appealing. But in any format that is really touchdown heavy, the half PPR, Damian Harris is definitely the guy I want.
Ever since Tyreek Hill left Kansas City, we've been, to borrow a drug reference, which maybe I shouldn't be borrowing, we've been chasing that dragon, right? We've been chasing the dragon of the Chiefs wideouts, right? Who's going to be the guy? Marquez Valdes-Scantling, Juju Smith-Schuster. Obviously, we've seen more than a few guys come to that Kansas City Kadarius Toney last year after he got traded as well. Now, none of them, I would say, have been even sniffing a top 12 receiving season, but that doesn't mean they don't have fantasy value. A guy I missed on in a lot of my drafts, my dynasty rookie leagues last year, Andrew, probably because my Packers fandom had me drafting Christian Watson all over the place, but I missed out on Sky Moore. I don't have him anywhere. I have a chance to fix that this year in my redraft leagues when I'm drafting, these new teams. Should I be looking at Sky Moore this year? Is he a value right now for you in Kansas City?
100%. Because what we're hearing out of Chiefs camp, besides the fact that, Kadarius Toney has, wide receiver 1 potential, is that Sky Moore is going to play the slot. Like, that's the role that we want Sky Moore to play. It's what he played at college when he was his most efficient. And last year, he couldn't have that role because Juju Smith-Schuster was the team's main slot receiver. Mecole Hardman was the team's main slot receiver. They used both those guys ahead of Sky Moore, and those guys were mostly effective when they were both healthy at points last season. But You look at what happened last year. After Juju got hurt in week 10, Sky Moore led all Chiefs wide receivers in targets over the next 2 weeks. 12 targets, 10 catches for 99 yards, over 3 yards per route run as the team's primary slot receiver. We just look at the games where Moore popped off and just saw more volume. Any game where he at least ran 10 slot routes, he saw 6 targets. He had at least 2 catches in 5 games where he at least ran 7 slot routes. Like, this isn't a lot of slot routes, but when he was inside operating as the team's primary slot receiver, he was getting targeted. And this is the role that they're projecting him to play, that they want him to play in 2023. So I love Sky Moore coming out. It's not really surprising to me that he didn't hit the ground running as a rookie coming from such a small school system like a Western Michigan. So I mean, dare I say, the sky's the limit.
God, Jesus. Andrew, how many kids do you have? Because that was a fantastic dad joke.
Joey P and Derek Brown always talk about how I'm great with the dad jokes, even though I am not a dad as far as I know.
Well, listen, you are dialed in for that portion of fatherhood. If you ever get there, when you get there, you are dialed in on that. Sky Moore, wide receiver 49 in the Fantasy Pros Championship. Where right now he's going at the 10:03 behind Jamison Williams and Rashad Bateman, right ahead of Zay Flowers and Romeo Doubs. I want to stay in that same division, talk about a couple of players in Los Angeles this year. And we've been talking a lot of mid-round choices right now. Let's go with somebody who is actually going a little bit higher than some of these players. That's Justin Herbert. Now, he has an ADP of 5'11 right now. He's basically, I still contend that Justin Fields cannot talk about how great he is, by the way, in this offseason. Talking about he's one of the greatest one of the top 5 greatest running quarterbacks of all time. Talking about how he's going to break the single season passing yardage. He's going to break 4,000 for the Bears this year. Hey, that's all fine and good. He was my first pick in the Scott Fish Bowl. I hope that it works out for him, but I remain skeptical. I still think he is going to catch Justin Herbert here before the start of the season because of that running potential, but maybe he shouldn't. Maybe Herbert should be the 6th quarterback off the board, and maybe he should actually be a little bit higher. Why is Justin Herbert a value right now, Andrew Erickson, at the 5'11 pick in the Fantasy Pros Championship?
Because we're all just kind of forgetting what he did in 2021 when he scored the 2nd most fantasy points among all players. Like, he was averaging over 23 points per game. And last year, it was basically the perfect storm in terms of everything going wrong for Justin Herbert. Mm-hmm. None of his receivers could stay healthy. He played 4 games with a fully healthy combination of Keenan Allen and Mike Williams. Last time I checked, they play 17 games in the NFL, not 4. So he didn't have his weapons that he was used to having, and that's why his numbers struggled. That's why he regressed. That's why he had a career low in touchdown rate. And yet he still has thrown the most touchdowns for the first 3 years since Dan Marino. So the guy is still putting up numbers despite the fact that he's lost weapons specifically last year, but now they've added to his arsenal. They added Quentin Johnston in the first round. So now he has 3 top-tier wide receivers. They brought in Kellen Moore to take over as the offensive play caller. We saw Kellen Moore dial up amazing, efficient offenses in Dallas. First year with Dak Prescott threw for a career-high passing yards, over 4,600 yards. So I think that right now is the perfect time to buy back on Justin Herbert, where his price is suppressed, where you can get a quarterback that could finish technically number 1 overall at the position. Now, without the rushing, maybe he doesn't hit number 1 overall, but it's still a guy that I think is just being undervalued because of just last year, and we're not looking at the whole scope of Justin Herbert.
I give all the praise in the world to Mike McCarthy because he helped bring a Super Bowl championship to Green Bay. That said, the last couple of years when he was a head coach in Green Bay, I did not want to see him there anymore. He goes to Dallas. They decide basically, and I don't know who made this decision, but Kellen Moore moves on from Dallas to Los Angeles. And Mike McCarthy said something to the effect of, yeah, Kellen just wants to pass all the time without really concern of what it's doing to the defense or what have you. And I said, that's a fair point. But at the same time, I want to draft fantasy players that are playing for Kellen Moore. I want to draft the pass catchers that are going to be going pass all the time. Austin Eckler is a phenomenal pass catcher. Gerald Everett, I mean, he was a darling for a lot of high-stakes players last year late in drafts, and myself included. I grabbed him in a ton of drafts late as a backup and ended up starting him in a lot of my leagues. And then you consider Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, and you use a first-round pick on Quentin Johnston this year. How do you take advantage of all that value? You draft Justin Herbert. But maybe you want to do something else. Maybe you want to grab another Charger on your team. And maybe you're not a believer that Austin Eckler is going to stay healthy all season. Maybe you're not a believer that Austin Eckler is going to be able to have this massive workload week in and week out. Okay, so let's look at the backup running backs there. There's 2 of them going in the Fantasy Pros Championship very late right now. You're looking at Joshua Kelly, running back 69 at the end of the 17th round, and then Isaiah Spiller, running back 80 at the 18-19 turn, basically there. You could cash in on either one of those. They're basically free. If you're picking between one of those right now, Andrew, who is the better value, Josh Kelly or Isaiah Spiller?
I'm going with Josh Kelly. He's a more trusted veteran player. Isaiah Spiller just entering his 2nd year. Isaiah Spiller had the runway last year as a rookie to make a splash, and he he face planted. Like, he did absolutely nothing to carve out a role behind Austin Eckler. Now, Joshua Kelly didn't necessarily light up the scoreboard, but he got to play. Like, when he played, he posted career highs in terms of efficiency, in terms of rushing yardage. So I think that he's the guy. Like, we talk about players like Samaje Perine last year, right? Nobody wanted Samaje Perine. I don't even think he got drafted. Like, people just didn't draft him. They're like, oh, it's going to be Chris Evans. It's going to be this guy. It's going to be the backup to Joe Mixon. And we're all wrong. It was Samaje Perine. Just this forgotten about veteran who's kind of just hung around a roster, never really done much, never really had an Alexander Madison or Tony Pollard game that really, like, put them in the spotlight because, oh, well, if this guy gets hurt, like, this guy will step in. Like, Josh Kelly's never had that opportunity. But we've already talked about Kellen Moore has been vocal about wanting to get 2 to 3 running backs to take turns. We saw that in Dallas. Zeke and Tony Pollard both played a lot for that offense for multiple years. So I think Joshua Kelly, especially with Austin Eckler, also being vocal about, hey, like, take touches off me, please. I want to save my body. I think Joshua Kelly could potentially be that goal line back for the Los Angeles Chargers, score some touchdowns. And again, bringing it back to the Jaguars conversation, I'd rather take Joshua Kelly over any of these Jaguars running backs, besides Travis Etienne, of course. But when we're comparing backfields, the Chargers are going to be a high-powered offense, and I feel more comfortable betting on Kelly to be the number 1 backup to Eckler versus any of these Jaguars being the direct backup to Travis Etienne.
I think the Chargers, I'm with you on this. I like any piece I can get of this offense, I'm really happy with this year. Be it Allen, be it Williams, Johnston, Everett, Eckler, Herbert, whoever. Like, I think they are going to be high-powered, and they could be in some shootouts there in the AFC West as well. We have been shooting out a lot of great fantasy knowledge. Well, not we, but Andrew Erickson has. I'm just kind of driving the ship for fantasy leagues right now. We have much more to come, ladies and gentlemen. 1 hour to go here before we turn things over to Dynasty Nerds and Garrett Price coming up at the 9 o'clock hour. But we're going to get into the heavy hitting portion of the show. We are going to find out where Fantasy Pros Andrew Erickson stands on players like Jalen Waddle, players like Jahmyr Gibbs, and a guy who was just in the news, and Jordan Addison, and not for a good reason as well. We're going to get into that and much more. It's the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show. He's Andrew Erickson. I'm Eric Balkman. This is the Better Sports Network.
It's the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on Better Sports Network.
What can we expect from you out there on the track tonight?
Listen, I have a wife, 2 kids. I have, full-time jobs. I'm never nervous. I don't even know what that word means. Can you explain what nervous means? No. I'm ready to have fun. I've never done anything like this before. I got asked to be a part of this. This is fascinating. Like, it's so cool to just look around and see what goes on here. So I'm just excited to get out on the horse. And you want trash talk? Is that what you're asking me for? No trash talk. I hope everyone does well.
All right. Everyone's going to do well, but it has to be a winner. So give me your trifecta. Who's going to come in first, second, and third? Your heat.
I will go Maria 1, me 2, Willie 3, Moose goes 4th.
Well, it's very simple. I won this event last year. I won my heat, and so the defending champ has to be the favorite. Now, that makes me a little nervous just because I feel like it's hard to repeat. There's a little pressure when you're the favorite, but that being said, I'm still optimistic.
So your heat, it's you,
yes.
Moose and Keith from Better Sports Network, and Willie Colon.
I think Keith might be my stiffest competition, and I asked for this because I actually recruited Keith, if you didn't know. So Keith, if you win, you're welcome.
Malusis is very good. I mean, he knows what he's doing, but I'm going to go with Maria.
Keith is waving to the crowd. He must pay attention because they're off. It's Mark Malusis going for the lead. Maria Marino on the outside, and now Keith Irizarry on the outside with speed, and they're 3 wide into the first turn.
Woo!
Mark Malusis is locked in for his life. 138-2. They're into the stretch. Sportscasters Derby 2. And still in front, Keith Irizarry. And now Mark Malusis is trying to squeeze on through.
Come on! Yeah! Come on! Let's go! Come on, kick it! Kick it! Yeah!
Keith Irizarry. Keith, you did it all the way, wire to wire, over Mark Malusis.
Awesome! That was so cool!
The champ is here! Keith, what was it like being out there? Adrenaline rush, you were doing the Instagram live, so there was no panic. You looked cool, calm, collected the whole time, and you won it.
I felt really comfortable. I did. Like, I know you were joking with me before. Are you nervous? Are you whatever? What are you? David, the driver, was awesome. He's like, we're going to win this. I said, all right, let's win this. And he said, let's go. Yeah, I just felt really comfortable. I did. It was fun. We're in the lead. I got Maria Marino on the right side of me, and I'm like, oh my gosh, she's going to beat us, right? And then out of nowhere, you see Moose coming up this way, and we feel him breathing down our neck. And I'm like,
Moose
no,
on the loose. Watch out.
Moose was definitely on the loose, and we just got Moose by a neck, a nose, whatever you want to call it. Yeah, but again, all of this for a great cause, and it was absolutely awesome to do this. It was cool.
All right, Keith, congratulations, and no matter what, you could always hold this over Moose's head.
High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on Better Sports Network.
Second hour underway here on the Better Sports Network. This is the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show. I'm Eric Balkman from the FFPC, the HSFF Hour, RotoViz High Stakes Lowdown. He is Andrew Erickson, the analyst of football from FantasyPros. 2 top 10 weeks in last year's rankings competition. And you love Deontay Hardy. I feel bad I didn't put it on the show sheet. Do you want to make your case for Deontay Hardy? We're just talking about Gabe Davis. What can you say about Deontay Hardy right now?
Well, I mean, if you're looking for a guy that has a really high target rate that doesn't require a top 40 wide receiver draft pick like Kadarius Toney, Deontay Hardy is actually the second highest paid wide receiver on the Buffalo Bills. And before he got hurt last year with the New Orleans Saints, he was a really explosive playmaker. He basically was in that Rashid Shaheed role. I know a lot of people like Rashid Shaheed because he's like super efficient on like low targets. That was Deontay Hardy the year before, but now basically instead of it being Rashid Shaheed catching passes from Derek Carr, just imagine Rashid Shaheed catching passes from Josh Allen. So that's why I like Deontay Hardy. Also went to school very close to where I grew up. So I've kind of been a sucker for that reason. He's also changed his name a bunch of different times, and he's always like popped off in some of these like efficiency metrics, whether it's target rate per route run, yards per route run, and he's a very good punt returner. So something I look at, he's a very explosive player.
You know, I have had conversations with high stakes players, and I can think of, I'm not going to say their names, but I can think of 2 for sure in my head. And I think a third one were telling me Deontay Hardy this season, Bulky. Deontay Hardy, be watching for him. And he's starting to creep up in drafts. He's still basically free, but now we have Andrew Erickson on board as well. Now, you're in Massachusetts. Does this mean you're a Patriots fan, or have you, since you've been in the industry, you're just like, I'm not a fan anymore. I just like watching football?
Well, luckily it really transitioned well. Like once Tom Brady moved on, I became a bigger, person in this space. So I've been able to kind of shift focus to more fantasy stuff because the Patriots have obviously not been as good since they lost Tom Brady. Go figure. But obviously I'm still a Patriots fan. I actually go to training camp every single year to try to, do some boots on the ground type of analysis. And one of the biggest things I learned when I first went was when they first signed Jonnu Smith and Hunter Henry. There was like a big debate, like, oh, is it Jonnu? Is it Hunter Henry? And I was firmly on the Hunter Henry side of things because I noticed that he was Mac Jones's favorite target in the red zone. Every single time they were always using him in the red zone. They never used Jonnu Smith. And what do you know? Hunter Henry's first year, I think he caught like 8 or 9 touchdowns from Mac Jones. So very productive season. So I'm hoping this year when training camp starts next week, I can get some looks on Juju, on Mike Gesicki, who I like as a late round tight end. Like, where is he lining up? Is he actually like being used more like a receiver? So things like that. And I obviously got to see my guy Ramondre and see where he is in the depth chart. See how much he has on that RB1 role.
For more information on that, when Patriots training camp opens in less than a week, follow Andrew on Twitter at Andrew Erickson _, and he will give you the lowdown on JJSS and Gesicki as well. Okay, this is a redraft segment. However, Andrew writes a lot of Dynasty content as well. We love Dynasty Fantasy Football on the HSFF show. And if you want to participate in fantasy football literally every single day of the year, where the 4 months we get during the fall and winter isn't enough, register for a Dynasty startup draft at myffpc.com. They start at the $100 level as far as entry fees. They go all the way up to $5,000. So whatever your budget is, we have a league for you there. We've been doing Dynasty Fantasy Football for well over a decade, 1,400 plus leagues. Not a single one's ever folded. You don't have to worry about being the commissioner or a shady commissioner or anything like that. Go to myffpc.com and enjoy the Dynasty experience we have there. myffpc.com. Okay. In the Fantasy Pros Championship, I tried to collect some polarizing names here, and I don't know how polarizing these guys are, but I feel like if they're not polarizing, I think you have a strong take on it. So I look at the first round right now. Cooper Kupp is a first-round pick. Cooper Kupp last year, for a lot of people, was the 101. People were drafting him first overall, given what he did when he was Offensive Player of the Year in 2021. Now, he has fallen. On average right now, he is going at the 105. So he went from the top of the first round to the middle of the first round. Some would say that's not a fall enough for them to be in business with Cooper Kupp. I feel like you would disagree with that. Why should we be in business with Cooper Kupp if we have the 5th pick? Why is he a good investment in that pick?
We've seen Cooper Kupp play with Matthew Stafford for the last year and a half, basically, before Kupp's injury. And over that span, nobody has scored more fantasy points per game than Cooper Kupp. Like, when these two have been on the field together, Cooper Kupp scores more fantasy points than anybody else. So, yeah, I have him as my number 3 ranked player overall. If I have a top 3 pick, especially if I'm picking at the 103, I'm taking Cooper Kupp 100 times out of 100 times. Like, no hesitation for me. His medical reports have all checked out. Matthew Stafford, we're hearing a lot of positive about his neck injury that he's been dealing with. So, yes, like, Sean McVay is still there. Like, this Rams offense, I know just how bad they were last year, but it's because they didn't have the same guys. It wasn't the same offense. It was a bunch of different. Baker Mayfield was on the Rams. Do we remember that? Like, it wasn't the same team. So I think people are just kind of forgetting about that and writing Cooper Kupp off a little bit too much. Not looking at, dude, this guy was a monster even before his injury last year. First in wide receiver points per game, commanded the league's 2nd highest target share, over 31%. Who else is Matthew Stafford going to throw the ball to? Van Jefferson? Puka Nacua? Tutu Atwell? Tutu Atwell might blow away in the wind if it's out there. So, and they play in a dome.
And there's no, honestly, if I'm concerned about, well, it's a bad way to phrase it. The number 2 pass catcher for me on Los Angeles this year is probably Tyler Higbee.
Yeah.
And he doesn't scare me at all. Like that to me does not, I like Higbee a lot. I'm not going to draft Kupp.
He just gets the leftover targets.
Right. Exactly. Yes. That's a great point. Cooper Kupp is going basically 1 slot ahead of another player I'm going to ask you about right now. Tyreek Hill is the wide receiver 4. Cooper Kupp's the wide receiver 3. Tyreek Hill is going on average at the 106, 4th receiver off the board. His real-life teammate, Jalen Waddle, wide receiver 11 at the 207 right now. So you're basically looking at a round and a half separating Tyreek Hill, maybe about a round, separating Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. When you consider the draft capital, which is steep for both of them, when you consider the draft capital, Andrew, who's the better Dolphins receiver to draft this year? Is it Tyreek Hill or is it Jalen Waddle?
I mean, it's got to be Jalen Waddle, right? Like, are we going to really fade a guy entering his 3rd year at age 24 after an absolute monster sophomore year, former 1st-round pick? The dude can absolutely fly. No, when Tua was healthy last year, over 15 fantasy points per game, wide receiver 7 numbers, over 85 receiving yards per game with Tua healthy. Look, is Tyreek Hill going to have a 31% target share again, and Waddle's going to be down at 21%? Like, I wouldn't bet on that happening. I think the gap is going to close between these two players. Like, why wouldn't it? Tyreek Hill's getting another year older. Jalen Waddle is now entering his prime. Like, I understand it's hard for us to see them kind of merge, but this is the natural state of how things happen. When we're talking about the 2024 draft, is it just going to be Tyreek Hill over Jalen Waddle again for a 3rd straight year? I don't think so. I think it's going to be Waddle over Tyreek Hill. So I want to get ahead of the curve now by drafting Waddle instead of Hill in round 2 versus Hill in round 1, because I think that's where the better value is. When you look at the spike weeks with Jalen Waddle last year, he had one fewer top 3 finish than Hill, and his top 12 rate, basically finishing as a wide receiver 1, was 38%. That was the same as A.J. Brown and C.D. Lamb. He's putting up those types of numbers, and the only reason he's going behind those guys is because, well, he's the number 2 on his offense. Well, he's the number 2 right now, but I think when the season's all said and done, he may not be the number 2 anymore.
Would you, and this is from Barney Newkirk right now in the Facebook chat, would you be comfortable drafting Jalen Waddle in the mid-second, maybe even early second of the Fantasy Pros Championship, Andrew?
100%. Yeah.
Okay. Now, I'm going to do this. 2 follow-up questions to this. Let's do a would you rather real quick. Would you rather draft Jalen Waddle or Garrett Wilson?
Oh, God, I hate this question because I love them both so much.
So it's close. It's very close.
No, yeah, this one is close. I go back and forth with Garrett Wilson a lot of the time. I think for me, it's probably going to be, man, this one. I hate. Oh, guys, you're really pushing me on this question. I'm going to say I'll say Garrett Wilson for now, but don't hold me to it. I could change my mind.
Barney says Garrett Wilson as well. I want to the 3 guys that are going immediately behind Waddle. I just want to confirm you would take Waddle over Chris Olave, Devontae Smith, and T. Higgins, right?
Correct.
Okay, perfect. The second part of this question, and this goes back to the Anquan Bolden, Larry Fitzgerald days in Arizona. I remember in the FFPC main event, there were a lot of people that would draft Fitzgerald as like a 1st or 2nd round pick. Bolden was like a 2nd or 3rd round pick. Yet Kurt Warner wasn't being drafted until like round 12 or round 13. And understandable, it was only a start 1 quarterback league, right? But I was like, me and my buddy were talking about this, like, if you're taking Fitzgerald and Bolden that high, why is Warner not going till 10 rounds later? This happened with another quarterback, and it's escaping my mind. I think it was Eli Manning. I could be wrong on that. But these 2 receivers that are being drafted super high, and then the quarterback is being drafted way low. This year, we already said Tyreek Hill, middle of the 1st round. Jalen Waddle, middle of the 2nd round. Tua Tagovailoa, he's going all the way down in the mid-11th round by Dak Prescott. Should he be drafted higher? And this gets into the concept of stacking in the Fantasy Pros Championship. If you had Hill or if you had Waddle or maybe you have both, would you be willing to go up a round or maybe 2 rounds to get Tagovailoa to make sure you have that stack?
I'm going to say no. I don't think that Tua is necessarily a great fantasy quarterback because he doesn't run. Like that's the cheat code. Like he doesn't run. Like he's a pocket passer. So for me, it's like, yeah, you could be aggressive drafting Tua, but what about just draft Kirk Cousins? Like Kirk Cousins has good weapons too. And, he has less of an injury concern long term. You could say the same thing about Geno Smith. Geno Smith has 3 receivers that we all want to draft. And he goes later than everybody else, and he runs more than Tua does. So for me, it's like, yes, it's important that he has upside attached to these receivers. But at the same time, when everything was going his way last year for Tua, and I tried to point this out, I think I pointed out one of my threads on Twitter, was basically outlining the fact that when everything was perfect for him, he was healthy, he was throwing for a ton of yards, he was QB7. Like, he still wasn't a top 5 quarterback in fantasy because he wasn't running. Like, you have to post absolutely absurd, gaudy passing touchdown numbers to match the numbers of these other quarterbacks that are dual threats. And Tua just doesn't add. It's not that he adds like minimal value as a rusher. He doesn't add any value as a rusher. And from what I've seen from training camp of him just getting super bulky, he's not going to be moving the ball that much. He's not going to be running around that much because he's worried about his health. So I'm not pushing Tua up the board. I think that if he's there for you and you have a Tyreek Hill, you have Jalen Waddle, okay, it makes sense to stack him in those. And those would be drafts where I would take Tua. But I'm not reaching for Tua in a vacuum when he offers basically nothing as a mobile quarterback.
Does, getting back to the Hill Waddle angle, especially Waddle, does the fact that Mike White is he's the backup there, and obviously people are concerned with Tagovailoa's health, but when you talk about Mike White as the backup quarterback there, given what we saw from him last year, is that enough confidence for you to say, hey man, even if Tagovailoa goes down, Hill and Waddle are going to be fine because this guy can ball?
Yeah, I think so. And when you look at the system there that Mike McDaniel has set up, in a very Kyle Shanahan-esque way, we've seen this story before. Like we've seen backups come in for Kyle Shanahan, and what do you know? Jamie Garoppolo's out. Okay, put this other guy in. Okay, you don't miss a beat most of the time. Now we've seen it where when the fall off is so steep that it does crater the offense, which is what we saw last year with Miami. But they had nobody. They were dealing with multiple. Like it was Teddy Bridgewater, and then he got hurt, and then they're down to the third string guy. So it didn't work last year because they had so many injuries at the quarterback position. But this year they were prepared I thought that signing Mike White was a very savvy move. And we saw Mike White help put Garrett Wilson post strong numbers. So yeah, I think that that's very reassuring that yes, if something happens with Tua, if these concussions do come back or he suffers one, then at least you have Mike White to fall back on and feel good about supporting these two wide receivers.
One of my favorite tight ends this year for redraft is Darren Waller, because he is moving from Las Vegas where he doesn't have to deal with target hog Devontae Adams anymore. He goes to a situation in New York where, and I was talking about this a couple of weeks ago. I can't remember a team where their first receiver off the board is being drafted as low as the Giants are right now. Like they have a bunch of guys that could be all right. They have a bunch of guys that could totally stink it up. Shepard, Hodgins, Hyatt, all these other guys. Who am I forgetting here?
Clayton.
Yes, Darius Slayton as well. Going for these Giants receivers. None of these wow you at all. Paris Campbell, I guess, is another one. Wan'Dale Robinson. But Darren Waller, dude, going off the board right now as the 6th tight end in a tight end premium format like the Fantasy Pros Championship. You can get him in the middle of the 5th round. To me, this screams value. Like if I think it's important to get an elite tight end in this format. If you miss out on it, boy, Waller's a nice little fallback there in the 5th round. And then you are set with an every week starter at tight end. I like Waller this year. I don't know how you feel about him.
Oh, I absolutely love Waller. I think I have Waller as my tight end 3 overall. Like
behind Kelsey and Hawkinson, or
just I have it behind Kelsey and Andrews.
Okay.
Yep. And it's because he's in this elite tier of tight ends that are drafted as their number 1 pass catcher. He's Kelsey, Andrews, and Waller, and that's really it. And I guess sometimes Dalton Schultz, depending on how high your Nico Collins person is in your draft room, basically with Dalton Schultz. But with Darren Waller, the injury is it just the injuries? I think that's the only reason why. Because who else?
I mean, I think age plays a little part of it, but mostly the injuries. People are scared away from him.
Yeah, but the thing with Waller, though, and his injuries and his age is, okay, so he plays tight end number 1, and we see tight ends after age 30 produce plenty. Like, it's not just Travis Kelce. Like, we've seen a lot of tight ends produce. It's really about just the wear and tear on the body. Mm-hmm. And when you look at Darren Waller's career, I mean, he got such a late start. Remember, he was first drafted as a big wide receiver, and then he transitioned to it with the Ravens a little bit. And then he had his first breakout year with the Raiders after his stint with the Baltimore Ravens. So I think that Waller is, I mean, they went out and traded for this player because they needed to add a dynamic pass catcher for Daniel Jones. And Darren Waller can be that guy. I mean, it's so easy for him to stand out as the best catcher because he's just surrounded by wide receiver 3s. As far as the eye can see, that's all. The Giants put a monopoly on the wide receiver 3 market. They have every wide receiver 3 that plays the slot that you could possibly ask.
Jamison Crowder there too, as well. I forgot about him.
Exactly. So I think Waller, over the last 6 weeks of the season, he led all tight ends in yards per route run. So even though he wasn't seeing a ton of targets last year, he was still really efficient on a per target basis. So I don't think he's washed. If he's healthy, he's going to be a top 3 tight end, and he's going to give you a massive edge in fantasy football, especially in tight end premium formats.
The Jets are going to be on Hard Knocks this year, and it's unfortunate because I know that they didn't want to be there, and I know that the Lions said that they would be willing to do it again, and I would have loved to see the Lions on Hard Knocks for 2 years in a row. Number one, because I don't necessarily love Dan Campbell, but he is highly entertaining to watch on television, which I love that. But the other reason is I think the only thing that is separating Jahmyr Gibbs from the end of the first round in Fantasy Pros Championship drafts is the fact that people will not be able to see him not only see him on Hard Knocks, but see the way his teammates and coaches talk about him, right? We've seen it in the media. Now, it's one thing to read it and say, oh, God, the Lions are really high on Gibbs. It's another thing to actually see it with our own eyes. But what we are seeing and hearing, his teammates love him. The coaches love him. The beat writers are talking him up. And what we love as high-stakes players in full PPR formats like the Fantasy Pros Championship, we love these pass-catching running backs. Now, he is currently going at the 307, the 12th running back off the board. It is my contention that as we get closer to the FFPC live events in Las Vegas coming up in early September, that Jahmyr Gibbs is going to move up. He is going to be a mid, maybe even an early second-round pick as we get there. I think now is the time to draft Gibbs because I think he's only going to go up. Your thoughts on Gibbs this year? You can get him as the RB12 at the 307 right now, Andrew.
Yeah, I agree. The price point is sweet right now, and it's only going to get more expensive for Jahmyr Gibbs. I think the thing with him, and maybe it's really just this simple, is just imagine if the Lions liked DeAndre Swift. Like, guys, we were drafting DeAndre Swift last year at the end of the first round, beginning of the second round. Like, and nobody was questioning that. Nobody was batting an eye like, what? They drafted DeAndre Swift at the end of the first. Like, that was common practice. And now we're getting a rookie with a very, very similar skill set to DeAndre Swift that the Lions love. They love him. They took him 12th overall and were willing to be ridiculed for it, but they didn't care. And they still took Jahmyr Gibbs. So, yeah, I'm in on it. Like, I think you got to be. And I think that the reason he is priced where he is because of Bijan. Like, we're just not accustomed to having two rookie running backs in the first round where it's like, oh, well, Bijan is obviously like the shiny new toy. Like, he's the rookie running back you want, when it's like, well, wait a minute. Like, you can like Bijan, but like, you can also like Jahmyr Gibbs. Like, you don't need to only like one rookie running back. So, Bijan is actually kind of helping keep Jahmyr Gibbs' price down because all the shine for this prize rookie running back is now it doesn't need to be shared. So that's why I think Gibbs is also kind of where he's going. But I mean, this is an offense you want pieces of. The Lions have been one of the best offense over the last year and a half since Ben Johnson took over as the offensive coordinator, kind of calling plays with Jared Goff. Jared Goff is a check down savant. And I mentioned it earlier in the show, they have Amon-Ra St. Brown. Like, would it surprise anybody if Jahmyr Gibbs is like the number 2 target on this offense? I don't think so, especially with Jameson Williams coming back from a suspension. We don't know how effective he's going to be when he first gets back on the field. You have Sam Laporta. You have a bunch of other wide receiver threes, Marvin Jones, Josh Reynolds, Khalif Raymond, Denzel Mims. Like, are the coaches really going to dial up targets for those guys? Or are they going to be like, we're just going to give the ball to Gibbs and throw the ball to Gibbs because we drafted him 12th overall? I think I'm going to side with the latter there, Eric.
Let me ask you this. Are you a fan of the Marvel Cinematic Universe?
Yes, I would say I'm a fan.
Perfect. So you understand the multiverse.
Yes.
Let's go to a different universe right now where Bijan Robinson is not drafted by the Falcons. And in fact, Jahmyr Gibbs is the only running back drafted in the 2023 NFL draft first round. If that's the case and he goes at the exact same spot, how high are we drafting Gibbs this year with no Robinson? Would he be a first-round pick?
He's probably going right where DeAndre Swift was drafted last year. So right at the end of the first round, beginning of the second round. Yep.
And I think you're right, by the way. But I think we have to, and nobody's talking about this too. Like, we have to look at this in terms of Robinson and Gibbs are two separate players, and what Robinson does and where he is drafted should not necessarily have any kind of bearing on where we pick Gibbs. And yet I feel like, as your point, as you stated in your point, it does. Like, high stakes players it has an effect on them. And I don't think it should. And I think Gibbs right now, listen, this is why you draft early. And we're not even early anymore. It's July 20th. But this is why you draft right now, is so you can get the discount on Jahmyr Gibbs before he is going a month later in the early to mid second round, which is where I think he is going to be going. Okay, moving on to another running back. We talked about trying to find the fantasy goodness in Kansas City receivers. I feel like for years we've been chasing the fantasy goodness or lack thereof from the Kansas City running backs. We have seen pockets of greatness, with Clyde Edwards-Helaire. For the first part of last season, Clyde Edwards-Helaire looked awesome, right? And then we've seen pockets of goodness from Jerick McKinnon over the last couple of years as well. I specifically want to ask you about Isaiah Pacheco here, a guy who is in the non-contact yellow vest for the Chiefs right now, running back 30 at the 7-12. He's going behind Javonte Williams. He's going behind Alvin Kamara. He's going ahead of James Cook, and he's going ahead of Antonio Gibson. Pacheco at the end of the 7th round, is that a spot that we should be looking at drafting him, or would you be more comfortable drafting a different running back at that point?
I'm not comfortable drafting Pacheco there. You know, when it comes to these Chiefs running backs, you kind of mentioned it with, you know, them all having like these pockets of production. It's like a hot potato, right? And the Chiefs are willing to churn through running backs because they're just going to use who's ever effective for that stretch of games. And then some guy gets hurt or isn't as effective, and they move to the next guy. And this wasn't just last year. We've seen this for multiple years, whether it was, Damian Williams got hot, we're going to use him. Darrell Williams got hot. We're going to use him now. Like, and you don't want to be left holding the bag with the guy as the potato gets cold. And then that's the guy that flames out. And that's what I feel like it is with Pacheco. Now, Pacheco ended the season hot because he became the guy, but now he's injured. And just the way that Pacheco plays, he's such a violent runner. He's a 7th round pick. He knows he has to run like that because that's the only way he's going to get playing time, but it's going to take a toll on his body, as we've already seen it here with him recovering from shoulder surgery. So for me, it's, dude, Clyde Edwards-Helaire is free. Like you can get for free. We saw him, like you said at the beginning, he was productive because he plays on the Chiefs offense. And it's really less about, is Edwards-Helaire good or not? It doesn't matter if he's good because he's an 18th round pick at this point. And he has a 3-down skill set. He can catch passes and he can get goal line work. That's all he needs to be able to do. He doesn't need to be an efficient rusher in between the tackles because he's going to get put into a position where he can succeed as part of the Chiefs offense. And there's no risk associated with drafting him. Whereas Pacheco, I mean, you're pushing your chips in on Pacheco staying and keeping the job. But how tight of a hold does he really have on that as a 7th round pick? It's just so hard. He has to do everything right. I get Elijah Mitchell vibes, unfortunately, from Isaiah Pacheco, where he was so great as a day 3 rookie, but the minute that he falters in any way or gets hurt, like they're going to try to replace him again. Like they've already talked about like Deneric Prince at Kansas City Chiefs camp. It's like, okay, what if he just like happens to be this year's Pacheco? So for me, it's like I can't invest a 7th round pick in Pacheco when I don't know how healthy he is. I don't know how many passes he's going to catch. Like, I don't know how his job security is. You know, I think that a good litmus test was a lot of these running backs where we're kind of concerned about like, okay, like what's their job security? Is you want to ask yourself, okay, tomorrow Leonard Fournette signs with the Chiefs. How do you feel about Pacheco? Are you like, oh man, like that's bad? Or is it like, oh, I don't care? If your initial reaction is like, oh no, that's bad, then you got to take a step back and be like, well, why am I drafting this guy in the first place?
It's a good point. It's a really good point. I think we know where you stand on Pacheco there. And I think, quite frankly, I think you convinced me, a guy who was on the fence, I'm probably going to be staying away from him at that price point at least. And by the way, a few high-stakes players have already told me about Deneric Prince and how they've been drafting him. They like him quite a bit this year as a late-round pick. Barney Newkirk already saying, stay away from Chiefs running backs. He's learned his lesson, as have I. We're staying away. A guy who maybe hasn't learned the lesson of not speeding when you become an NFL player is Jordan Addison. You know, I haven't heard anything, and I'm assuming there's no narcotics or alcohol involved in this like there was with Henry Ruggs. But Jordan Addison last night got cited for driving 140 miles an hour in a 55-mile-an-hour zone. And I think the biggest thing I learned from this is Lamborghini makes like an SUV or a crossover. I had no idea, and I'm mispronouncing this. Lamborghini Urus or Urus is apparently like a crossover SUV vehicle produced by Lamborghini. I had no idea. I'm not a young man anymore. I can't stay up on what the kids are doing, Andrew. But apparently this is what happened last night. Citation for speeding and reckless driving for Addison. I can't imagine he's going to be suspended for this, but there's a non-zero chance of anything. Your thoughts on... I don't necessarily want you to read into this too much because we know he won the Biletnikoff when he was at Pitt, and then he went to USC, played with the Heisman Trophy winner, and his numbers took a step back. I don't know if we can glean anything from this. I don't know if we're seeing if we're getting into the mind of Jordan Addison, what type of player he's going to be. But let's just keep it from redraft, a redraft standpoint. He was my 4th receiver I drafted in the Scott Fish Bowl this year. He is going to be playing behind a couple of target hogs in Minnesota in Justin Jefferson and TJ Hawkinson. Wide receiver 40 is where he's going in the Fantasy Pros Championship at the 806. Number one, does this citation affect the way you're thinking about Addison and drafts at all? And number two, would you be willing to sink an 8th round pick into a guy who is probably going to be, at best, the third wide receiver or the third pass catcher targeted on this offense?
Yeah, I don't want to change my opinion on him from a fantasy perspective, too much, based on this. I don't think that he's going to get suspended or anything like that. It's just kind of sad as just like a poor judge of character. Now, he's still like a super young player. So hopefully it's just a misjudgment on his part that, he would drive that fast in that type of area. But it doesn't look good. It's like, especially like now, again, you asked me about redraft, but like from a dynasty perspective, like this would definitely like trigger alarm in my mind.
Yeah.
Like, okay, like, why was he doing this? Like, especially in dynasty where you have these players for their careers, like, and Addison, didn't really seem like he had, at least from my analysis of him coming out of school, there were never any red flags like off the field issues with him, at least not to my knowledge. So I'm not going to let that affect me too much in redraft, especially if people overreact to it and be like, oh no, like he's a maniac. He's going to, do all these things. And now we're not going to draft him anymore. Like, I think that's probably not smart. I would probably try to buy any type of dip that he gets from his ADP, especially in redraft. But, again, like a lot of times especially when players have idle time like this, like he's not in training camp. So like, maybe that's part of the reason why, maybe he's trying to get home for curfew. Like I haven't heard like his side of the story here. Like maybe he's like, yeah, I was just being dumb. Like, or I was just trying to like drive fast. I don't know. So for me, I still like drafting Jordan Addison where he goes, especially now if he falls, because that wide receiver 2 role in that Vikings offense is super appealing. I mean, Adam Thielen was top 10 routes run per game last year, and he was dust. So now it's just like you're putting in Jordan Addison, explosive playmaker who can play inside and play outside. He's always going to get single coverage because of Justin Jefferson on the other side of the field. So he's going to put up spike weeks. He's going to have productive games. This Vikings offense is fast-paced. They like to throw the ball a ton. I don't have a lot of faith in their running game that they have right there. So I think it's going to be Kirk Cousins slinging the ball to Addison, Jefferson, and Hawkinson. So I'm excited for him, and I would definitely still be in on Jordan Addison at the current price tag.
Addison going right behind Burks and Pickens, right ahead of Gabe Davis and Elijah Moore. Barney Newkirk thinking that, well, maybe he was just trying to beat the Uber Eats driver home. Who among us haven't been in that position before? Like, non-zero chance of anything, as I always like to say. There is a non-zero chance, in fact, a way better than a non-zero chance, that we're going to give you some good 0 RB best ball targets coming up in the next segment, ladies and gentlemen. We have Andrew Erickson here as our guest co-host tonight. From Fantasy on consignment from FantasyPros.com. You follow him on Twitter at Andrew Erickson _. Listen, if you're going 0 RB in a national tournament like the Fantasy Pros Championship, the FFPC Best Ball Tournament, what have you, the FFPC main event, you need to know which running backs you need to get. Andrew did a draft where he actually took a bunch of these 0 RB targets. He's going to let you in on who those players are when we come back. This is the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show. I'm Eric Balkman. He's Andrew Erickson, and you're watching the Better Sports Network.
The High Stakes Fantasy Football Show with Eric Balkman.
So let's get into some best ball philosophy here.
Yeah.
In your experience, going back many, many, many years, drafting in national tournaments, Bradley, have you historically been shying away from the running back position in favor of wide receivers? In favor of, if you're drafting in the FFPC tight end premium format, in favor of tight ends as well? Is that the smart play when you're drafting this early in the drafting season?
Yeah, so taking value is going to be huge, and looking at like running backs and wide receivers, like you want to take a look at how the structure is. So you mentioned earlier the FFPC has a couple different types, like they've got super flex and one quarterback, and so that's going to change your strategy a little bit if you have only 2 wide receivers or if you're drafting 3 wide receivers. And of course, the PPR is a different aspect compared to other formats or other tournaments. And so keeping in mind the pass catching upside of some of the running backs may be more valuable in those formats. So the Austin Ecklers, the Christian McCaffreys may be more value because they get more receptions, and so like I loved taking late shots a couple years ago on like the JD McKissicks of the world who would get 50 receptions really cheaply. So that's something to consider. But when it comes to like overall value, like you're drafting, you're in the middle of a draft and you just notice that, I don't know, maybe it's Chris Godwin has fallen 14 spots, but Chris Godwin was not in your plans to be drafting. Like maybe you don't have a strong player take on Chris Godwin, or my take is that I don't think the Bucs are going to be particularly good this year. But for him to be dropping, let's say 14 spots is more than a full round. And based on the data that we've seen, if you get to draft a player more than 12 spots ahead or behind ADP, so they drop 12 or more spots, you have an 84% edge over the rest of the tournament players who are drafting this player, because typically this player isn't going to drop. The average draft position is a really strong indicator of where a player is going to go, and I think that is also on the flip side. If you are reaching too much, you're giving up value in your drafts. And so when it comes to value-based drafting, you need to consider, just because this guy isn't my plans or I don't have a strong player take on him, maybe that's your opportunity to sprinkle in some shares of this player at a good price.
It's the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on Better Sports Network.
Put your wings on, BSN viewers, because we are literally going to fly through this last segment. It's going to be heavy on the running back analysis. But by the way, if you're looking for some wide receiver analysis, specifically slot wide receiver analysis, get on over to FantasyAlarm.com. Andrew Cooper at Coop A Fiasco, our very own Fantasy Alarm correspondent, has a great article up on slot wide receiver concepts. That's at FantasyAlarm.com. I encourage you to check it out. It will make you a better drafter. FantasyAlarm.com has your cheat sheet and one-stop shop for dominating your drafts. Digital fantasy football draft guide, constantly updated with new information. Purchase the draft guide now, $26.99. Get it free with a monthly or annual subscription to Fantasy Alarm. 7-day free trial of Fantasy Alarm can begin today for you. All pro subscription. You can get immediate free access to the draft guide, FantasyAlarm.com. At Andrew Erickson _. Andrew Erickson, my guest tonight on the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show. You've been churning out a lot of great articles. I think we've touched on a few of them tonight. You produce so much, I can't get to all of them, which is unfortunate. But I do want to touch on one that you've done. Now, you recently did a best ball tournament draft where you're drafting for a massive grand prize, and you took a zero RB approach. Before I ask you about these players, can you talk a little bit about why zero RB can still be a viable approach? I know a lot of people do it in managed leagues, right, where you can pick up guys throughout the season. Why is zero RB a valid method for drafting your team in best ball?
Yeah, so I think in the best ball formats, especially ones that are PPR, where you can start up to 4 wide receivers, or you have 3 wide receivers and a flex, I think that's a big advantage for you. You can lock in a lot of these stud wide receivers earlier in your drafts. And right now, I mean, running back is deep. Like, running back is deeper than I think it's been in a long time. And I think it has to do with where it's not as top heavy as it's been in years past. So there is a lot of depth at the running back position. And we're going to talk about some of these zero RB best ball targets, because I really feel like I look at this team and I'm like, I really don't hate my running backs. Like, I see scenarios where these running backs can deliver for me if things kind of shake out the way I hope they can, and ultimately maximize the upside of my roster. Whereas the wide receivers are kind of holding the fort down. It allows me to draft an elite quarterback. Usually you can get an elite tight end too. And having elite at the onesie positions is massive in best ball, because you don't fall victim to, oh, this guy picked up Juwan Johnson. Juwan Johnson didn't get drafted in best ball last year because nobody knew who he was. So you have a big advantage, and how you can get to drafting those elite quarterbacks and tight ends is by taking them early. If you do that, you have to then sacrifice another position, And I found that you can sacrifice running back, especially in a draft like I think I did this on DraftKings, where it's a 20-man roster. So you have extra spots where you can fill in just another backup running back, another backup running back. So I think that's kind of how you can use the strategy in the best ball format.
Can you talk a little bit about because James Conner in the and I'll switch. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm actually going to switch the. We've been talking about the Fantasy Pros Championship, but this will be from a best ball standpoint. So I'll look up our ADP for our $200,000 best ball tourney that's going on right now, and talk about the ADPs there. I love this guy for managed leagues. I love this guy for best ball. James Conner, running back 27 at the 707. You took him a little bit higher, which is fine because I still think you got a great value on him. People are sleeping on Conner, and they're doing it wrong if they're sleeping on Conner, right?
Yeah, I mean, he's just like this bell cow back that nobody wants to draft because he plays on a bad team. But all the research I've done when it comes to drafting running backs on bad teams is if they get volume, it doesn't matter. And that's all James Conner did last year. That's all he did the year before then. Like, the Cardinals paid James Conner and they're using him. Like they're using him. And last year, in 6 games without Kyler Murray playing, like, again, the reason why we're all afraid about the Cardinals sucking is because they're not going to have Kyler Murray, averaging over 21 fantasy points per game, James Conner. Like, he's going to be the engine of the offense. Now, I get, he's probably going to break down. But, yeah, okay, he misses a couple games here and there, but he's scoring 20 fantasy points in between all those missed games. Like, yeah, in round 7, of course you're going to take that.
And you mentioned this earlier in the first hour, too. What's the competition for Arizona there? There is none. And Barney Newkirk pointing that out as well. Like, it is James Conner's backfield. And as long as he's healthy, it's going to be his backfield there. Now, we have a split situation going on in our nation's capital right now. Brian Robinson, Antonio Gibson there. Antonio Gibson was a guy that you drafted on this team as well. Running back 32 going at the end of the 8th round. I know there's a lot of – it seems like he's getting steamed up a little bit, and I think Gibson's ADP is going to rise. If you want him, now's the time to get him.
Yeah, I mean, I just love Antonio Gibson, and he really checks off all the boxes I'm looking for in like a breakout running back, or in his case, a bounce back. You know, he has proven production. He's been a fantasy RB1 before.
Yep.
Like, it really wasn't that long ago that he was posting top 12 fantasy football numbers. He has a 3-down skill set. He has the size. He has the speed. He has the track record of production. And the only reason he's not being drafted higher is because they drafted a guy named Brian Robinson. They drafted a guy named Chris Rodriguez. But it's a new offensive coordinator. Eric Bieniemy's coming in. And we've seen him turn the table on some of these backfields in Kansas City, like we talked about before. He made Jerick McKinnon a basically top 10 running back. A 31-year-old journeyman Jerick McKinnon because of his pass catching. Like, if Gibson got a Jerick McKinnon-esque role plus a little bit of rushing production on top of that, he could be an RB1, and you can get him in the 30s at running back. So I love Antonio Gibson, and I think that his skill set, specifically as a receiver, plays very favorably in how I kind of see the Commanders' season playing out. The Commanders have one of the toughest schedules of all teams this year. I think they're going to be negative game scripts a lot of the time, and that means you're going to see Antonio Gibson on the field more than Brian Robinson. So I think Gibson is just slated, and I get that but there's enough pessimism around Gibson that I think at the end of the day, even if he does move up around, he's still going to be a value at the end of the day.
I agree with that. And if you're going 0 RB, Antonio Gibson is like example 1A of what you should be doing there. It makes perfect sense for a guy who not only has those 3rd down chops, those pass catching chops, but a dude who could easily assume a 3-down role in Washington this coming year as well. We have not talked about, and not only in this show tonight, I have not talked about Kendre Miller on this show enough. This is a guy that you drafted as your 3rd running back in this draft, Andrew. And he is, I believe, on the PUP right now in New Orleans. I could be wrong about that.
So he's on the NFI list.
NFI, that's what it is. NFI list. Thank you. And this is an injury that he suffered in college that he's still trying to get over right now. But Kendre Miller, I mean, the New Orleans backfield is so fascinating because you have 3 guys there that I know a lot of people are excited about. Jamal Williams led the NFL in rushing touchdowns last year. Alvin Kamara was a 1st down darling for many years in the FFPC. And now you enter Kendre Miller, running back 47 in the 12-12 right now, as far as his ADP goes. Can you tell us a little bit about, despite the presence of Williams and Kamara, why you like Miller here?
I just loved his profile coming out of TCU. Just this like big, explosive back. I mean, he's the same size as Bijan Robinson. 5'11", 215 pounds, bell cow size, can catch the ball, super explosive, 3rd-round pick. Like, he was a 3rd-round pick and did not test. That, in today's NFL, for a running back not to test and still get drafted in the 3rd round is beyond me. Like, that doesn't happen. So that just tells me that the Saints were super high on this guy. And they're like, we don't care if he doesn't test. We don't care if he's not 100% right now because we know we can do when he's on the field. So I think that he could potentially be like the second coming of Alvin Kamara, and he is their long-term plan at the position. And I think especially during the fantasy playoffs, he could have a massive role in this offense while Kamara is serving a suspension. Jamal Williams, we've kind of seen, is just a guy. Like, he obviously takes advantage of opportunities, which he may get at the beginning of the season. But I think as the season kind of winds down, I think Kendra Miller is going to have a big role in this offense.
Yeah, and those are the money weeks, right? In the FFPC Best Ball Tournament, or whether you're drafting the main event, Fantasy Pros Championship, those are the money weeks, and that's when you want to have these guys. The next running back you took off the board in this draft was Chuba Hubbard, who doesn't have to deal with Deontay Foreman anymore in Carolina. You think, oh, the backfield's his. No, the Panthers went out and signed Miles Sanders. So, and he's still got to deal with Raheem Blackshear, obviously, in that backfield. But Hubbard is a guy that, you know, before his final collegiate season, I think a lot of people were very excited about drafting him for Dynasty. And now we look at him being the backup, the guy behind the guy, the injury away type guy in Carolina behind Miles Sanders. There's a lot to like here, given the fact that if Sanders were to go down or were he to miss any time with that rookie quarterback there in Bryce Young, Hubbard could prove to be having a very valuable role. And again, he doesn't have to be great for the whole season, but for a few games here, Hubbard could be big for you.
Yeah, he was super efficient last year. He finished the season as PFF's 21st graded rusher, 4.9 yards per carry. He's been efficient when he's been called upon. And when McCaffrey has missed time in the past. So that's all I'm really looking for with some of these running backs. Now, when you go 0 RB, you're embracing the injury variance that is the running back position. You're hoping that guy, or not hoping guys, but you're acknowledging that, okay, there's going to have to be some injuries that kind of work in my favor. So drafting Chuba Hubbard is a bet on, okay, I don't think Miles Sanders can stay healthy. I think the Panthers have an underrated offensive line, and Hubbard offers an explosive skill set who can catch passes out of the backfield. So I think that he's a good 0 RB target for those reasons.
The Dolphins running back situation is something that to me has been fascinating literally all offseason. We knew, we found out that Mostert and Wilson were coming back. Then the Dolphins drafted Devon Achane in the draft. And then they had been rumored to be also wanting to add Dalvin Cook, which never really, it didn't compute with me. I don't necessarily know if he would have been a good fit in Mike McDaniel's offense. They already have the 3 guys there. And now I saw the latest report, and forgive me, I can't remember who stated it, but it sounds like the Patriots are actually the favorites to land Dalvin Cook now. So I don't know if he's going to be going to Miami. But if the Dolphins don't add anybody else, I mean, there's a lot to be excited about with Jeff Wilson as running back 51 in the FFPC Best Ball Tournament, a player who you can get at the 13-14 turn right now, Andrew.
Yeah, it's weird how the Patriots are going to sign Dalvin Cook, Leonard Fournette, and Darrell Henderson.
And Darrell Henderson. They're bringing back Kevin Falk. Corey Dillon's coming back there as well. They're all the whole band's coming back together. This is like the Eagles' Hell Freezes Over tour with the New England backfield right now.
So with Jeff Wilson, he has been a player that just finds his way into fantasy production. Like last year, he was a fantasy RB2 in over 50% of his games between 2 teams. On the 49ers, he was productive. On Miami, he was productive. He got more guaranteed money. He's younger than Raheem Mostert. Now, obviously, if Dalvin Cook lands there, it kind of blows things up. And I do like Devon Achane as a rookie, but I don't expect Achane to just carry a massive load for the Miami Dolphins. He's an explosive rusher. I think he's going to be efficient, but Jeff Wilson, I think between him and Raheem Mostert, I much prefer Wilson because of his age. And I think that he has a better chance of carving out the goal line role, which you kind of want in an explosive Miami Dolphins offense.
Josh Jacobs did not reach a long-term contract at the time of his, the franchise tag deadline. Now, he did not sign the franchise tag either. And I don't know if his threats are as harsh as Saquon Barkley's threats are to the Giants right now, but he's clearly not happy. And if he does start the season after reporting right before week 1, I don't know if that opens him up to some injuries. We kind of let off the show with that tonight. He plays a rough position. So either way, he could go down. Zamir White, if Jacobs does go down, do you envision a 3-down scenario for Zamir White in that offense?
I don't envision a 3-down scenario. I think that they would probably do the classic Bill Belichick, Josh McDaniels, running back by committee type of scheme. I could see them even adding a free agent running back, but I think White would be next in line to at least take on the lion's share of work in the backfield. You know, he's a Georgia back. You know, all these Georgia backs come in from a committee in some way, shape, or form, but Zamir White, I know, has a 3-down skill set. He has decent size. He has decent measurables. And he was very productive at Georgia on a per touch basis, per snap basis. So Josh McDaniels is pretty notorious for like never playing rookie running back. So I don't think it was because White wasn't good enough to play last year. It's just they don't use rookies, and Josh Jacobs was on fire last year. So they used Josh Jacobs. But it would not surprise me at all, even if Jacobs does come back, that Zamir White just has a larger role than he had last year.
This was just one draft that you did as far as the best ball league goes, where you went 0 RB. You ended up with Connor, Gibson, Miller, Hubbard, Wilson, Zamir White. We talked about all those guys. We talked about Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who you also got in this draft. We talked about him earlier. This is by no means to say these are the only 0 RB targets that you should be looking at. For somebody else who, maybe some of these guys are gone, or maybe they want to look at somebody else, who are some of the 0 RB targets maybe that you didn't get in this draft, Andrew, that you're a big fan of?
Jaylen Warren for the Pittsburgh Steelers, I think, is a nice 0 RB target. I think Najee can bounce back, but it seems like Jaylen Warren's going to have a role in this Steelers offense regardless. And if Najee can't stay healthy or is inefficient, you could see Warren potentially taking on an even larger share of an offense that I think is going to be ascending in 2023. And then Kenneth Gainwell. I think that he's a guy in PPR formats. He's the incumbent on the Eagles. They added a bunch of new running backs, but Kenneth Gainwell was there last year. They trusted him down the playoffs. Kind of reminds me of how the Chiefs trusted Jerick McKinnon down the playoffs, and he had a massive year the following season. So don't overlook Kenneth Gainwell.
Last thing here, FantasyPros.com, at Andrew Erickson _ on Twitter. Are those the best places where we can get the maximum amount of Andrew Erickson content right now?
Yes, indeed. At Andrew Erickson _ Instagram, Threads, TikTok, Fantasy Pros, and also on YouTube as well.
And you guys, you still do the Fantasy Pros podcast too, right?
Yep, flagship pod with Joey P, Derek Brown, Pat Fitzmaurice, all the guys over there, Ryan Wormley. It's a fun time.
It is a fun time. So check that out anywhere you get podcasts. Andrew Erickson, thank you so much, man. I really appreciate you. I learned so much, and I was entertained tonight. This was a lot of fun.
Hey, we brought the dad jokes, so it was a good time.
More dad jokes coming next Thursday at 7/6 Central when the HSFF show returns. I want to thank Andrew Erickson, our producer, Anthony Rivera as well. Remember, you can win a $1 million grand prize at the FFPC. Actually, 2 of them. You can win a $1 million grand prize in the Fantasy Pros Championship when you register. Just a $350 entry fee to win $1 million. The FFPC main event also offering a $1 million grand prize as well. Play fantasy football year-round with the Dynasty format at myffpc.com. 1,400-plus leagues. None have folded in more than a decade. Thanks so much for watching, everybody. We'll be back next week. Dynasty Nerds and Garrett Price up next on the BSN.